Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a quiet little walk back into your childhood, down the hallway, lined with soft toys and nightlights, past the cracked closet door, and into the room where something was always waiting just out of view. We all had imaginary friends, didn't we? Little companions to keep us company when the world was too loud or too empty. But what if yours remembered more than you did? What if they never left? Fair warning, you probably won't survive this one with your childhood nostalgia intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first time Erin remembered seeing him, she was 4 years old. Her mother had just tucked her in the hallway light, humming through the narrow crack in the door. Her room was a mix of pale pink and scattered books, the kind of cozy chaos you only get when a child still believes the floor is lava and every stuffed animal is secretly alive. He didn't walk in. He was already there, sitting cross-legged at the foot of her bed, watching her, smiling. His name, she said the next morning over cereal, was Fitch. Her mother didn't flinch. "Is he nice?" she asked gently, spooning oatmeal into her mouth. Erin nodded. "He tells me stories about before." Her mother laughed, soft and distracted. "Before what, sweetheart?" But Erin only blinked, unsure now if she was allowed to say it again. Fitch had warned her, "Some memories are sleeping. Don't poke them unless you want them to open their eyes." Fitch was different from other kids' imaginary friends. He didn't like games. He didn't pretend to be a pirate or a ninja or an animal. He liked questions. Deep ones. What do you think happens when your reflection moves slightly out of time if you had to choose one room in the house to be locked inside forever? Which would you pick? Why does your mom turn off the hallway lights slower when your dad's not home? Erin never had the answers, but he never seemed disappointed. He had no shadow. She checked. She once tried to draw him long fingers, too many joints, a smile that didn't stop at the cheeks. But every time she looked away from the page and back again, the pencil lines had changed. One time it was just a blank page. Another time, his eyes had multiplied. Eventually, she stopped trying. When she was 6, Fitch told her something strange. "You'll forget me soon." Erin frowned. "No, I won't. Everyone forgets, but I don't. I remember everything." She was asleep before she could ask what that meant, and like most children do, she did forget. Not all at once. More like the fading aftertaste of something sour and sweet at the same time. By the time she was 8, the drawings were gone. The name Fitch didn't feel like anything real anymore, and the stories had been buried beneath math homework and weekend cartoons. But he didn't leave. Not really. He just moved to the corners, the dark ones, the ones behind the closet door when it clicked shut just a little too fast. The ones in the mirror when she brushed her teeth and didn't quite look like herself for a second too long. The ones where you swear something is watching, but when you turn, it's only your own reflection. Paused a heartbeat late. By high school, Erin had grown into a quiet girl with sharp thoughts and tired eyes. Her friends were few but kind. Her parents still together, but distanced in the way grown-ups get voices low at dinner, silences between footsteps. The house felt thinner somehow, like the walls had been stretched. It started again the day she moved into the attic room. The old guest room had always been cold, even in summer. But Erin liked it, liked the slant of the ceiling, the tiny round window that looked out onto nothing but the neighbor's dying apple tree. It was quiet, isolated, hers. The first night she slept there, she dreamed of being 4 again. Pink room hallway, light the soft sound of something breathing just outside the blanket line. In the dream, she turned her head, and he was there, sitting cross-legged at the foot of her bed, smiling. "Welcome back." She woke with her heart calm, not racing. like something had returned to its proper place. At school that day, she found a note in her locker written in clean, deliberate handwriting. "You left me waiting." It wasn't signed. She hadn't told anyone about Fitch since she was 6, and something told her he hadn't told anyone either. Erin stared at the note in her hands long after the final bell rang. The words weren't threatening, no jagged letters or crimson ink, but something about their plainness unsettled her, more than if they'd been scrawled in red. "You left me waiting." It was intimate, patient, inevitable. She folded the slip and tucked it inside her notebook, pretending it didn't make her palms sweat. That night, the attic room was colder than usual. She checked the window, still locked. No drafts, just that stillness again, like the air had paused its usual hum to listen. She curled under her blanket and stared at the round window. The apple tree beyond it was almost skeletal now, its leaves long gone, its branches like fingers scratching the sky. Sleep came late. When it did, it brought no dreams, just a sudden awareness of waking up in the middle of the night, alert heart quiet, and eyes already fixed on the foot of her bed. It was empty, but something in her remembered the weight of someone sitting there. She pulled the blanket tighter and turned away. The next morning, she found a second note taped to her mirror. "It's almost time." No explanation, no name. But her reflection seemed darker, slower to catch up. Her face looked the same, except the eyes. They were hers, but not. She left it there untouched. At school, everything felt distant, as if someone had dialed down the volume on the world. Her friends' voices were muffled. The clatter in the cafeteria seemed underwater. Even the teachers spoke slower. She doodled in the margins of her history notes without realizing it. Long fingers, too many joints, a grin that curved too wide. When she blinked, the lines had rearranged themselves. The figure in the drawing was waving. She shut her notebook and didn't open it again. That evening, her mother knocked on the attic door. "Dinner, honey." Erin didn't answer right away. She was sitting on the floor, back against her bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling beam where shadows clung too tightly. When she did respond, her voice sounded far away. "Coming." They ate in near silence. Her father scrolled through his phone. Her mother stirred soup, not really eating. Erin sipped water and said nothing. The room was filled with everything not said. When her spoon touched the bowl, it clinked loud, sharp. She jumped. "Everything okay, sweetie?" her mom asked. Erin nodded, just tired. Upstairs, back in her attic room, she found the third note waiting on her pillow. "You were never supposed to forget." The words felt heavier this time. That night she didn't sleep. She lay in the dark, watching the shadows shift along the sloped ceiling, waiting for something to move. Around 3:12 a.m., the house let out a soft creak, not like wood settling, but like footsteps pausing mid-step. Her mouth went dry. Then nothing, just silence. She finally drifted off just before dawn, and in that thin sliver of sleep, she heard him again, voice soft like breath against her ear. "You remembered the wrong things." She woke, gasping, throat-tight heart, racing for the first time in days. The round window was open, the latch still locked. There was a note on the inside of the glass held there by condensation. "Let me in." She didn't touch it. She didn't open the window. She just closed the curtain and stepped away. But that evening she found the fourth note folded neatly under her pillow. "You already did." By the time Friday came, Erin's thoughts no longer moved in straight lines. They curled inward, circling back on themselves, looping like ribbons in water. She could focus just long enough to nod, to smile, to appear present. But inside, she was listening, always listening for that voice. It didn't speak aloud anymore. It lived between her thoughts, waiting patiently for silence. And when it came, it whispered things she couldn't unhear. "You made me. You forgot me. You owe me." She stopped checking her mirror altogether. At school, her teachers began to notice. A paper returned with a note. "You drifted off halfway through." "Are you okay?" Her best friend Lexi asked if she wanted to come over that weekend. Erin smiled and said, "Maybe." But they both knew she wouldn't, because she couldn't leave the attic now. Not really. That night, her parents argued downstairs. Nothing violent, just that low, muffled friction that fills a house like rising smoke. Erin sat on the attic floor, knees drawn to her chest, counting each wordless second between thumps of footsteps. The room felt smaller than usual, the slanted ceiling pushed down, the corners leaned in. Then she saw it half tucked behind her bookshelf. Another note. This one was different. Not folded, just resting there as if left gently, almost thoughtfully. "I remember your first lie. It was about the doll." Her mouth went dry. She didn't remember any lie. Not really. But the word doll unlocked something in her. A sudden flicker. Age 4, maybe 5, something about a missing toy, a broken ceramic arm, and a story she told her mom that wasn't true. She hadn't thought of it in years. She hadn't even known she remembered it. Fitch had. That night, she dreamed of her old bedroom, the one from when she was little, long before the attic. The furniture was too small now, the air thick with dust, and the scent of something sweet gone sour. In the dream, her child self sat on the bed legs swinging while Fitch crouched beside her, his 2 long arms wrapped gently around her shoulders. "You told them the wind knocked her over," he said in a soft, sing-song voice. "But it was me, wasn't it? And you didn't want them to know." Dream Erin nodded. Real Erin woke up with tears drying on her face. Her alarm hadn't gone off. The screen was shattered from the inside. She didn't remember dropping it. When she sat up, there was another note taped to her ceiling. "We're almost aligned again." She pulled it down, hands trembling. There was no tape. It was just stuck there, clinging, as if the words themselves had weight. Later, over dinner, her father mentioned something strange. "Hey, I ran into that old neighbor, Mr. Kenner. He asked how you were settling into the attic room." Erin looked up slowly. "What did you say?" "I told him you liked it." "Why?" She hesitated. "Did he say anything else?" Her father frowned. "Only that. Well, he said he thought we'd sealed that room off years ago. Said it wasn't good for kids." Erin felt the blood drain from her hands. Her fork slipped clattering onto the plate. Her mother glanced up sharply. "Erin." "I'm fine," she said. Too fast, too flat. She left the table without finishing. Back in her attic room, the light bulb buzzed faintly overhead. She sat at her desk and opened her notebook, not to draw, but to write. She wanted to take control of the story again, to map the timeline, to find the seams in this thing before it fully swallowed her. At the top of the page, she wrote, "What does Fitch remember that I've forgotten?" The pen slipped in her hand, not fell-slipped like someone had pulled it away for just a second. When she looked back at the paper, the words were gone. In their place, one new line. Everything, the following days, bled into each other, indistinct and gray, like fog creeping under a locked door. Erin stopped going to school. At first, she told her parents she wasn't feeling well, just tired, maybe a virus. Her mother fussed and brought tea. Her father left cold compresses by the door, but no one pressed. They were used to her quiet, and in their minds, quietness was safety. It wasn't. Not anymore. Not in the attic. The space itself had begun to shift, subtle at first. The floorboards near the bed creaked in a new rhythm like breathing. The shadows beneath her desk stretched longer even at noon. One morning, she found her shoes on the wrong feet, lined up neatly beside the closet. She hadn't touched them. She hadn't worn them since Monday. She found herself drawn more and more to her notebook, not to write, but to watch. When she opened it, sometimes words she hadn't written filled the pages. Not full paragraphs, just phrases like breadcrumbs. "You weren't the first. They called me Echo once, under the stairs." She never heard them being written. They were simply there, waiting, always in the same slanted script, always without smudges as if the ink had never been wet. She began to remember things she had no reason to recall. A shadow behind the couch at age 3 that blinked. A dream from when she was 7, where her stuffed rabbit whispered numbers that turned out to be the combination to the garage lock. Her aunt once caught her talking to an empty chair at a funeral and said in a tone too light to be casual, "That better be Jesus or your imagination." Aaron had laughed, but now the memory felt weighted, like it had been buried under something, or by someone. One night around 2 a.m., she sat up in bed and saw a small paper folded on the windowsill. She hadn't heard a sound. The window was locked, the curtains still drawn. And yet the paper was there, crisp and undisturbed. She opened it slowly. "Do you want to remember all of it?" She stared at the question. Not a threat, not a demand, an invitation. Part of her wanted to burn it, to scatter the ashes into the wind, and pretend none of this had ever followed her up the stairs. But the other part, the quieter part that had always belonged to Fitch, lifted the pen. She circled the word yes. The room shifted the moment the ink dried. The walls didn't shake. The lights didn't flicker. It was subtler than that, like the whole house leaned slightly, just enough for a breath to fall differently. A pulse beneath the floorboards, a hum in the air. The memories came in pieces at first. Flash images, her mother screaming in the backyard, while Aaron watched calmly from the window, holding a doll with button eyes. A dream where Fitch led her through a hallway lined with mirrors, each showing a version of herself older and more afraid. A voice whispering, "If you ever open the crawl space, you must finish what you find." And the doll, always the doll, her name had been Mara. Aaron hadn't thought of her in years, but the memory returned now with crystalline detail, porcelain skin, red yarn hair, one eye permanently blinking. She remembered the sound it made when it fell, not a crash, but a crack, like a tiny fracture splitting open in the air. She had blamed the wind. Her mother had nodded uneasy. Her father had stared at her for too long. Fitch had been there. She saw him now, in memory, clear as glass, sitting beside her as the pieces of Mara were swept away. His smile wasn't comfort. It was agreement. "You chose me," he whispered then and now. She sat on her bed, shivering without cold, trying to steady her breath. She wasn't scared, not exactly. Fear was too small a word. What she felt was something deeper, a recognition. Fitch had never left. He had been patient, a shadow folded into the shape of memory, waiting. When she blinked, the attic lights dimmed not off, but softer like twilight creeping into the bones of the room. Her notebook lay open on her desk. She hadn't touched it, but the page turned itself slowly, as if caught by a wind that didn't exist. New words formed across the parchment in steady black strokes. "We're almost whole." Aaron walked toward the notebook as if in a trance. The air smelled faintly of dust and rain, like earth disturbed too early. Beneath her feet, the floor hummed subtle, rhythmic, like breathing. She touched the notebook. It was warm. She turned the page. This time it wasn't a sentence. It was a map. Her house. Every floor, every room, every crevice drawn in meticulous detail, from the narrow slats behind the washing machine to the hollow beneath the stairs. She saw a circle drawn under the attic itself, an area that didn't exist on any blueprint, an empty cavity right beneath her bed. At the bottom of the map, written in a different ink, "You buried something there." Her hands trembled. She looked at the bed, at the rug beneath it, at the floor. The house didn't move, but she did. Aaron dragged the rug aside slowly, not out of fear, but out of something closer to reverence. The floorboards beneath looked ordinary, untouched, but her fingers moved with certainty, tracing the edges, pressing lightly, until one gave way with a soft pop. It didn't creak or resist, just opened. a rectangular cutout thinly veiled perfectly flush with the rest of the attic floor. She hadn't known it was there, and yet some part of her had always known where to press. She crouched, lifting the hatch with both hands, revealing a shallow crawl space no deeper than a foot. Dust curled up like breath, slow and patient. She didn't need a flashlight. The soft light from her room seemed to spill downward on its own, illuminating the hollow with a strange amber glow. Inside, resting neatly in the center, was a box wrapped in an old pillowcase printed with faded moons and stars. She recognized it instantly. It had been hers years ago, part of the bedding set from her first big girl bed. Her throat tightened as she reached in and lifted the bundle. It was heavier than expected. Something solid inside, but not metallic. Something that breathed its own stillness. She sat cross-legged on the floor, just as Fitch used to, and unwrapped the cloth. A doll. Not Mara, not the original one, but an exact replica. Except this one was wrong in small, deliberate ways. The yarn hair was black instead of red. The face was pale, but the eyes weren't glass or painted. They were sewn shut with black thread, each stitch careful and deliberate. The mouth, also stitched, was wider than it should have been, reaching almost to the edge of the face, as if smiling and screaming at once. The dress was familiar blue with a yellow sash, but stained in places that looked too dark to be old paint. Erin didn't move. She just stared. The air in the room shifted again, not colder or hotter, but tighter. Like every particle in the attic was leaning inward, watching, waiting. She whispered, "I don't remember this." A sound followed, a creak soft and deliberate from behind her. Not the house, not wood. A movement. A presence. She turned slowly. Fitch stood in the far corner, half in shadow, half in that strange amber light. He hadn't changed. Still tall for a child, still bent in odd ways, joints where none should be. His smile was exactly as it had been in her childhood, kind on the surface, but ancient underneath. He didn't speak, not with his mouth. The words arrived directly in her head, smooth and quiet like water finding a crack in stone. "That isn't the original. You destroyed her, but you couldn't bury the bond." Erin looked back at the doll. Its stitched eyes seemed to pulse faintly. "You made this one to keep the door open." "What door?" she whispered. "The one between what you see and what you know. The one I came through." She tried to stand, but her knees refused to lift her. Her body was heavy. Her hands still clutched the doll, unwilling to release it. She felt warmth spreading through her fingers, not heat, but memory images flooding in without sequence or permission. A game she played in secret alone in her room, asking the doll to bring Fitch back. The time she sat cross-legged with candles, whispering nonsense words that came to her in dreams. The moment she whispered, "I promise," though, she couldn't remember what she was promising or why she had said it. Her hands loosened. The doll fell to the floor without a sound. Fitch stepped forward slowly. Shadows clung to him like wet cloth, pulling slightly with every movement. His eyes, deep and unreadable, never blinked. "I waited for years while you played human. I didn't remember, but you chose to forget." The words struck her like a bell rung too close to the ear. She wanted to deny it, to protest, but the memories kept coming. The ritual in the basement, the whispers through the vents, the time she heard her mother crying in the kitchen and smiled without knowing why. "What are you?" she managed to ask. Fitch tilted his head. "I'm what you called. I'm what you built. I'm what grows in the space between loneliness and belief. I don't want this anymore. Want doesn't change the roots." The door opened both ways. "You gave me your name. You wore mine when you slept. We're almost done." The doll began to twitch. Not a lot. Just a subtle shift. A twitch of one yarn limb like a muscle responding to old electricity. Erin stared as the head turned slowly toward her. The stitched eyes seemed tighter now, the mouth curved wider. She backed away, hands scraping the floor. "Stop!" Fitch didn't move. "Finish what you started." Then he was gone. No sound, no retreat, just absence. The attic was quiet again. The light returned to normal. The crawlspace hatch remained open, the pillowcase still lying like shed skin. The doll sat on the floor, unmoving again, but changed. Its head now tilted in her direction. A single stitch in the mouth had come loose. Erin stood dizzy. She stepped backward, then turned and fled the room, not looking back until she was halfway down the stairs. Even then, she didn't look at the attic door. She just closed her bedroom door behind her and sat on the carpet, trying to breathe. She had forgotten him. She had forgotten herself. But Fitch remembered everything, and now the bond was waking. Erin didn't sleep that night. She lay curled on the floor of her old bedroom, a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, eyes locked on the base of the closed door. Every creak of the house, every shift in the walls was met with held breath, but nothing came. No footsteps on the stairs, no whispers from the attic above. The silence pressed in thickly, but it didn't move. It watched. When dawn seeped in through the blinds, gray and sluggish, Erin stood and moved carefully back up to the attic. The door was closed exactly as she had left it. No scratches, no notes. She opened it slowly, half expecting the doll to be gone, or worse, moved. But it sat exactly where she had left it, limp and quiet. The loose thread on its mouth hung like a question mark. She considered putting it back in the crawl space, wrapping it up, sealing the hatch, burying it again. But a new thought had taken root overnight. A possibility. A quiet certainty. What if it couldn't be buried? What if that was never the point? She took it gently in her hands, noting the weight of it again, too much for fabric and thread. As she held it, a tingling bloomed across her palms, not painful, but insistent. And with it, another memory stirred. She was 6, maybe younger, sitting in a circle of salt drawn messily around her playroom. Fitch had instructed her voice echoing inside her chest, not her ears. He told her to repeat something. A rhyme, nonsense syllables, words that didn't belong in a child's mouth, words that tasted like dirt and metal. She'd thought it was a game. Now, as the memory sharpened, she remembered what came next. The room went cold, not chilly wrong. Her toys leaned slightly toward her, as if bowing. And the doll Mara, the first one, stood up on her own. That was the moment she now realized, when everything shifted. When Fitch crossed from the shadow world into hers. When he moved from imaginary to inhabited. And now he wanted back. She spent the next few hours digging through her closet, pulling out old boxes, old journals. She needed proof. Something from before memory. Something Fitch couldn't twist. In a shoebox marked Erin. Age 5, she found a faded crayon drawing. She'd drawn herself smiling in a garden. But beside her in childlike shapes was a second figure, tall, all black, with long arms and fingers stretching down to the ground. No face, just white circles where eyes should be. Above it, written in blocky letters, "My friend." Her hands shook. She found more in other boxes. A photo of her birthday, her 5th one. Everyone smiling, except her. She was staring off camera, eyes wide, expression unreadable. And in the blurry background, barely visible through the window glass, was a figure in the yard. Not a person. Tall, thin, too still. She tore the photo from its frame and turned it over. In faded ink, her mother had written, "The year of the imaginary friend." She took the doll back to the attic that evening, not out of bravery, out of necessity. This wasn't going to end by hiding. The door had already opened. Something had to walk through, and she'd rather choose the moment than wait to be surprised. The attic welcomed her in the strangest way, warm, quiet, almost peaceful, as if it had been expecting her. She placed the doll in the center of the rug. Then she sat. No candles this time, no chants. Just the memory of what had already been done. The air thickened again, slow at first, then steadily heavier. Her breath shortened. The corners of the room deepened, shadows pulling inward like a held breath. Then, movement. The doll twitched. A limb, then the head. Erin didn't flinch. Fitch appeared beside it, not walking in, not fading into view, just there, like blinking into another reality. He smiled. Not cruelly, not kindly, just knowingly. "You kept your promise," he said aloud this time. Erin nodded once. "I don't remember what I promised." He stepped forward, crouched by the doll. "You promised to be the door. I was just a child." He tilted his head. So were we all once. She wanted to scream at him, to ask what he was, why he chose her, why he had waited. But instead, she asked, "What do you want now?" He looked at her, really looked. Into her, not just at her, to come home. She shook her head. "This isn't your home. It is now. It's shaped like you." The doll began to rise. Not float, stand, legs bending wrong arms, twitching like marionette strings being pulled by invisible fingers. Its stitched eyes split open thread by thread, revealing nothing underneath, just void. Darkness without shape. Fitch extended a hand. "Will you open the rest?" "I don't know how." "You already did. Years ago. This is the echo." Erin hesitated. Then she stood, heart steady in a way she didn't expect. Her hand reached toward the doll, hovering just above its chest. The attic breathed, and the door between what was and what shouldn't be began to open. Her hand hovered over the doll's chest fingers, trembling just above the fabric. The air had weight now, dense and electric, like the sky before a storm. The attic was silent, except for the sound of her breath, shallow, deliberate, and the strange rhythm beneath the floor, that low thrum like a pulse. The doll didn't move, but it waited. Fitch, standing just behind it, no longer looked like a child. The proportions were still roughly human, but his presence had grown taller, heavier. He no longer felt like something born in her imagination. He felt like something ancient that had once borrowed a child's shape to fit through the cracks of her world. Erin lowered her hand slowly, palm pressing against the doll's chest. The fabric was cool. Not lifeless cool like stone left in the shade, like something that had once known warmth and had forgotten it. As her skin made contact, a vibration passed through her bones like a ripple from far underground. The attic flickered. Not the light, the room itself. For one fraction of a second it changed. She saw different walls, older ones lined with roots and ash. She saw writing carved into wood backwards and burned. She saw faces that didn't belong to anyone she had ever known. Then it was gone. Fitch's eyes gleamed. "You see now. What is this place?" she whispered, though the answer was already coiling in her mind like smoke. "It's the seam," he said. "The fold between what's forgotten and what's real. And the doll, the anchor, the hinge. You gave it meaning when you gave it a name. Mara," she breathed. But she broke. "I remember. You broke her," Fitch corrected gently. "Because you were afraid. Because you saw what she carried." Erin's heart beat faster. "I don't want this. I didn't want any of this." He stepped closer. "But you made it. That's the rule. Belief builds. Fear shapes. You never needed candles or rituals. You just needed to need me." She backed away a step. "Why me? Why not some other lonely child?" "Because your belief had no edges," he said simply. "You didn't pretend I was real. You knew I was. And then you tried to unknow it. That's where the power lives. In the forgetting." She wanted to scream, to claw at her mind and scrape out the memories that didn't belong, but they were all hers. every word whispered into shadows, every game played in the dark. Every moment she'd talked to something no one else could see and felt in her bones, that it wasn't pretend. "You're not here for me," she said, suddenly realization crashing into her like cold water. "You're here for something else." Fitch said nothing. "You want to stay." Still he didn't speak. "You want a form." A faint smile curled at the edge of his mouth. "A home." The doll jerked once. Its legs twitched, then its arms. It began to straighten in slow, precise movements, like something learning to use its body. Its head tilted toward Aaron. The loose stitch that once dangled from its mouth fell silently to the floor. "I didn't invite you." "You never had to," Fitch said. "You willed me." She looked at the doll. The eyes, now open, were still stitched shut, but behind those black threads was movement. Not light, not color, depth. A bottomless, yawning darkness, like a tunnel with no end. "What happens if I finish it?" she asked, her voice flat. "You stop being alone," Fitch said softly. Aaron laughed once, bitter and sharp. "That's what this is about." Filling silence. "It's about balance," he said, and there was something like sadness in his tone. When something is forgotten, it doesn't vanish. It waits. And when someone finally remembers, it wakes. The room shifted again, just a breath, but enough. The floor grew darker, the corners deeper. The shadows moved, not like they were cast, but like they were crawling. Fitch stepped aside, gesturing to the doll. "You've already opened the door. All that remains is stepping through." Aaron stared at it. The way its hands had begun to flex fingers, twitching like muscle returning to life. The way its head turned slightly each time she moved, as if tracking her not by sight, but by recognition. It didn't look threatening. It didn't look angry. It looked inevitable. "What happens if I refuse?" Fitch's smile didn't change, but something colder entered his eyes. "Then I wait again. For the next you. The one inside you. The one that's still 5 and scared and curious. And that part of you never forgets." The air pulsed once, heavy with finality. The attic creaked, not the boards, but the walls themselves, like something inside them had shifted position after a long sleep. The doll took one step forward, and Aaron had to decide. Aaron's feet remained planted as the doll moved forward, not in jerks or spasms, but with eerie smoothness, as though it had always known how to walk. Its joints bent naturally, despite being stuffed and sewn, and with each step, the tension in the attic thickened. The air was filled with a sound that wasn't a sound, more like a memory of static. The low hum of a TV left on in an empty room, the whisper of dreams bleeding from a child's subconscious. She didn't run. She didn't scream. Something deeper than fear had rooted her to the spot. She was no longer watching a horror unfold. She was part of it, stitched into the fabric of whatever this was. Fitch watched her silently, his arms crossed, as though evaluating whether she was truly ready. The attic felt larger now, impossibly so. Like the room had unmoored from the house and drifted into some private cosmos built from everything she had tried to forget. The doll stopped just a foot from her head, tilted slightly, its mouth still half-stitched. Then it raised its hand and reached toward her palm, open. Aaron stared into its blank, dark eyes and felt a strange warmth rise in her chest. Not comfort, recognition. She remembered naming it, sitting on her bed as a child, cradling it, whispering secrets to it. She'd told it things no one else knew, let it hold her when the house felt too big, when her parents were shouting downstairs, or too silent to hear. She remembered the way it had always turned toward her, even when she placed it down, facing the other way. How its arms were always open. She remembered holding its hand under the blanket the night she first met Fitch in a dream. And she remembered the promise. "You'll never be alone," she had whispered to it. "As long as you're real, That was the moment the crack formed the hairline fracture between what was real and what was imagined. The moment belief became a binding, and the attic, a room she had never even seen at the time, became a destination. Her fingers twitched. She reached out, mirroring the doll's gesture. The space between them seemed to ripple slightly. The moment her palm touched the doll's, a surge passed through her, not pain, not cold, but memory, not her own, flooding her with images like water rushing through a broken dam. A forest at night, torches in the distance, chants in a language she didn't recognize. A room with no windows filled with mirrors turned inward. A child's voice screaming from inside a wall. 1,000 dolls, all stitched, all waiting piled beneath floorboards in places no longer remembered. Then silence. Erin pulled her hand back, stumbling a step, her breath caught. The doll remained still, but now its smile had changed, subtle, yes, but undeniably wider. One eye had opened fully, thread-broken clean. What stared back was not an eye, not even something biological. It was a hole. A tear in the world shaped like sight. It didn't reflect light. It absorbed it. Fitch stepped closer. You've opened the seal. It remembers you. Now it needs your name. My name. Names are anchors, he said. You gave it one once. It needs one from you. Not Erin. Not what they call you. The first one. The one you made up in your head when you still believed monsters were friends. Erin shook her head slowly. I don't remember that. You do, he said, tapping his temple. Just not up here. But in here, he placed a finger over her heart. It's carved. She closed her eyes, feeling the press of those old echoes circling inside her. A name on the tip of the tongue of a girl who used to name shadows like pets. It came slowly rising, not like a scream, but like a lullaby sung backwards. Lyra. The moment she said it aloud, the attic reacted. The walls shivered. The temperature shifted, not colder, but older. The boards beneath her flexed, then settled. The doll bowed its head slowly, as if acknowledging an ancient rite. The last stitch in its mouth snapped. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of weight of waiting, of conclusion. And Fitch smiled, not triumphantly, but with deep, satisfied calm. Now, he said, we finish what was started. He turned and pointed to the far corner of the attic, where the shadows were now deep enough to look like openings. A circular mark had appeared on the floor just past the edge of the rug. A perfect ring burned into the wood, lined with symbols she had never seen, but somehow knew. A threshold, that he said is the well. Erin's breath caught. She had never seen it before, but somehow she knew it had always been there. Not a well for water, but for memories. Names, fears, the buried selves people forgot to grieve. And it was open. What happens if I go in, she asked. Fitch tilted his head. You become whole. And if I don't? He gave a small shrug. You'll keep bleeding pieces of yourself until there's nothing left but the doll. And one day, someone else will find her. And she'll be waiting. Erin looked at the circle again. The well, the wound. Then she looked at the doll. Mara, reborn smile, unfinished eyes, black as silence, and she felt the pull. Not of terror, but of completion, and she stepped toward it. The moment Erin's foot crossed the edge of the circle, the floor beneath her feet hummed, not loudly, but with a presence that felt like breath beneath the boards. The symbols lit faintly with a color she couldn't name, something between silver and ash. The attic behind her faded at the edges, the light from the lone window dimming as though sunset had skipped ahead. Fitch stood just beyond the threshold, not following, merely watching. His face had softened, no longer the smirking riddle, but something more akin to reverence. Erin didn't speak. There was nothing to say that wouldn't feel childish, meaningless. She stepped fully into the circle and waited. The air was denser here, rich with static and scent, earth-old books, the tang of something metallic. At her feet, the burned sigils flared again, responding to her presence not in obedience, but in acknowledgement. The floor cracked not apart, but downward, as if the space below had been hollow all along and only now allowed itself to open. She didn't fall. She was drawn. The boards under her sagged gently and released her weight without resistance. The attic vanished in a breath. Fitch the doll, the dust all gone. Erin descended into blackness, not with velocity but with intention. She was moving, yes, but the motion felt internal, as if her mind peeled away from its own borders. She passed through a narrowness, an impossible threshold too small for a body and too wide for a thought. Time slipped, direction ceased, and then she was standing on solid ground. The well, if it could be called, that was not circular, not walled. It was a vast chamber of endless shadow, like being inside a thought unfinished. The floor was flat carved from some unknowable stone, humming faintly with life. All around her were dolls, hundreds, thousands, some cradled in niches carved into the dark, others standing upright, silent and watching. None were duplicates. Each had unique stitches, hair fabric expressions. Some were smiling. Some looked afraid. Some were blank, so blank they pulled the eye away. One thing united them all. Of them faced her. Erin turned slowly in the center of the void. The space wasn't cold or hot. It was still so still it pressed against her skin. And yet she didn't feel alone. The dolls weren't just relics. They were vessels. Vessels of stories, promises, broken names. Each one was someone's belief made physical, then lost. Forgotten. Abandoned. You came back? The voice echoed softly from everywhere and nowhere. I never meant to, but you did. And you brought the door. She turned. It wasn't Fitch this time. It was a woman. Or the shape of one. Her form flickered like flame without heat, her edges blurred and shifting. Her eyes were deep hollows that shimmered faintly like the sky before lightning. Her hands were clasped before her long fingers wrapped in shadow. You were one of us, the woman said. Until you weren't. I didn't know. You chose not to remember. The voice didn't carry judgment. It was a reminder, not a rebuke. Erin's hands twitched. She glanced down. The doll had returned to them, though she hadn't carried it. It rested in her arms as naturally as breath. Its eyes were fully open now, dark, empty, endless. Its limbs were limp, but its weight was steady. What is this place? She asked. The woman gestured around them. It's the vault of belief, of what children send away when the world tells them to stop imagining. A graveyard of companions, a sanctuary for the half-remembered. Erin swallowed hard. So it's hell? No, the woman said. Hell is where they forget you entirely. This is the in-between. And what am I supposed to do? Complete what you started, bind what you broke. The woman stepped closer, and her form shimmered again, this time more clearly. She looked like someone familiar. Not quite Erin, but not a stranger. Her face held echoes, childhood games, schoolyard dreams, nights spent whispering to shadows in the dark. She was a version, a possibility. You split the bond when you broke Mara. That was your denial. Now with this one, you've made a new covenant. One built with awareness, not fear, not confusion, but intent. Erin looked down at the doll. She's not Mara. No, she's you. And what you buried, there was silence, not empty but full of gravity. I didn't mean to make her real. The woman smiled softly. Meaning has nothing to do with it. You believed. And belief is the most dangerous kind of creation. The air shifted. The chamber dimmed, the dolls leaning inward just slightly. The weight of memory pressed into Erin's ribs. She felt the slow rise of something beneath her skin, heat not fire, but memory burning clean. She knew what was being asked of her. Not sacrifice, not punishment. Integration. Erin knelt, and set the doll down gently on the floor. She placed both hands on its chest and leaned in until her forehead touched the spot just above its heart. The words came without prompting. A rhyme, a promise, a name. I give what I buried. I call what I lost. I bind what I made. I am the door and the key and the one who watches. The moment the last word left her lips, the doll's eyes flashed once. Not light awareness, then silence. The well shuddered once beneath her, and then opened wider. The stone beneath Erin's knees vibrated with a deep, resonant pulse, as though a great sleeping heart beneath the floor had stirred. The dolls, once still and silent, now began to hum in unison. No voices, no melody, just an underlying resonance, a harmony too ancient for words. It passed through her bones like a low chord, strummed across the strings of her soul. She didn't move. Her hands remained on the doll forehead, resting gently against its threadbare chest, even as the ground beneath her opened not violently, but like a slow, widening breath. The void within the well expanded outward, not downward, swallowing the walls of the chamber in seamless black. Space itself was unraveling. She lifted her head, and the doll was no longer just cloth. Its skin now seemed to move slightly under her hands, too subtly to call it alive, but too responsive to be dead. The stitches had vanished. The mouth, once forced into a grin, was now relaxed and waiting. The eyes remained black voids, but within them spun the faintest pinpricks of color, like stars caught in a whirlpool. She stood slowly, cradling it against her chest, as a mother might a child. Around her, the other dolls leaned forward, as if breathing her in, accepting her presence not with worship, but with solemn acknowledgement. Each was a witness, not a servant. From behind, the voice returned, Fitch's now, but changed. No longer echoing with the childish mischief of her memories. It was deeper, richer, woven through with something primal. You've reached the center, Erin. Most never do. They leave before the choice is clear, or they get devoured by the echoes of their own fear. She turned to face him. He was no longer in his boyish form. What stood before her was tall and cloaked in shadow, his features only barely human. Long limbs, elongated fingers, a face, half mask and half glow. But his voice still held the warmth she remembered, even if it now carried the weight of centuries. What is the choice, she asked? To become the guardian, or the echo? She frowned. Guardian of what? Of the seam, of this place, of everything that was loved and then forgotten. He stepped closer. Or you can walk away. Forget it all again. Live in your world of dull edges and shallow fears. But the price of forgetting is always heavier the second time. Erin looked down at the doll in her arms. It blinked. A slow, deliberate blink, as if testing the muscles of its own awareness. Her fingers curled tighter. There was no fear in her anymore, no disbelief, just clarity. What does being the guardian mean? That you stay. You hold the boundary between belief and oblivion. You tend the stories. You remember for those who can't. She nodded slowly. And the echo, he tilted his head. You become part of the song, folded into the background, a whisper in someone else's attic. Maybe you come back. Maybe you don't. But your shape is lost. Yourself, diluted. Erin thought of the years she'd spent not remembering the way the absence had haunted her in quiet moments. How she'd always felt like something was missing, like a part of her had been left behind in a dark room somewhere. She was tired of that hollow ache. She wanted to be whole. I'll stay. Fitch didn't smile, but his eyes flickered with a soft glow. Approval. Respect. Then place her at the center. Erin stepped toward the open space where the floor had widened into a perfect circle rimmed with lightless void. She knelt once more, lowering the doll to the center. The moment it touched the stone, the room convulsed, not with violence, but with release. The darkness surged upward, not to swallow, but to weave. Threads of shadow and light stretched out from the doll, latching to the walls, the ceiling, the 1,000 dolls around her. Each thread shimmered like liquid memory, tying stories together, knitting silence into meaning. The figures of the other dolls began to fade, not vanish, but merge their forms, dissolving into streaks of memory that flowed into the walls like ink in water. The chamber changed. It brightened not with light, but with color, rich hues of emotion, saturated shades of longing, laughter, grief, and joy. The void was no longer a void. It was a library, a sanctuary of remembered things. Fitch stepped back, folding into the walls like smoke. "I'll linger a while longer," he said, "but it's yours now." Erin stood in the center of the well-turned vault, surrounded by shifting stories, glowing lines of belief looping through her fingers like silk. Her name pulsed in the air, not spoken, but known. Lyra, Erin, guardian. Above, far above, a narrow sliver of attic light peeked through the crack she had once opened. It no longer beckoned. The door would remain, but she would not walk through it again. She had come home. The days, or what she assumed were days, passed in a way time had long forgotten. In the vault, time did not tick, but pulsed like waves lapping against the shore of something old. Erin moved through the corridors of memory and imagination, each hallway lined with echoes, not sounds, but impressions, giggles, lullabies, prayers whispered under blankets. She walked between remnants of belief, broken dreams, and stitched promises, and learned to listen with something deeper than her ears. The dolls were no longer just relics. They were keepers. Each carried the last breath of a child's longing, their fading hopes given shape and thread. Some still glowed faintly. Others sat dormant, waiting for the world above to remember them. Some flickered violently unstable, caught between belief and denial. Erin found herself drawn to these most of all. They were the ones, like her forgotten, fractured halfway between real and myth. There was a small one, no bigger than her palm, made of bark and moss. Its seams were loose eyes, 2 tiny seeds stitched in with golden thread. It trembled when she approached, not with fear, but with uncertainty. She knelt, cradling it gently. A memory spilled from it, a little boy crying in a hollow tree during a thunderstorm, clutching the doll and begging it to take the fear away. The memory stopped short. Erin whispered the boy's name, Caleb, and the doll grew still, then warm, a soft glow returning to its chest. She placed it on a carved shelf among others newly awakened. This became her work. Day by unspoken day, she tended the forgotten. She stitched, mended, named, remembered. Her fingers became familiar with the language of thread and story, the weave of belief. Fitch rarely returned. When he did, it was brief sometimes, as shadows sometimes, in the form of flickering static, like the ghost of a voice on a detuned radio. But she didn't miss him. He was part of this place now, as she was, and his absence was never silence. It was space, a reminder of everything not yet known. Then one shift, one breath of the vault brought something different, a door. It appeared not with ceremony, but gently, as if it had always been there, simply unnoticed. A smooth arc carved into the far wall of the chamber, seamless and silent. Erin hesitated before approaching it. Doors in this place weren't metaphors. They were decisions. This one was unlike the trapdoor to the attic or the well she had descended through. It radiated neither darkness nor warmth. It was pure potential, something unfinished, something from outside. As she reached for it, She felt resistance, not physical, but emotional. Her fingers hovered inches away, trembling with recognition. It was not her memory pressing back. It was someone else's. A child, maybe. A woman. Someone standing on the edge of forgetting. Someone letting go of a belief they no longer had room for. The door pulsed. Erin opened it. What she saw wasn't a place, but a moment, half-formed, fragile. A woman sitting on the edge of a hospital bed, hands in her lap, staring at an empty chair. Her eyes were red. On the bed, a child's stuffed toy rested limply, a hand-stitched bird with tattered wings. The woman whispered something Erin could not hear, but she felt it in her chest like thunder without sound. "I'm sorry. I can't hold this anymore." The toy dimmed. The scene flickered. Then, the toy's shape shimmered, began to break apart into fading particles. The belief tether snapped. Erin acted. She stepped through, not with her body, not even with her mind, with something deeper, the self she had become here, the guardian, the seam keeper. She reached across the thinning veil and caught the bird just before it unraveled. It resisted at first, twitching, trying to dissolve into the nothingness of lost faith. But Erin whispered its name. Not the name given by the mother, but the one the child had whispered into it during a storm. Percy. The threads reformed, the wings mended. The toy blinked once slowly and turned its little beaded eyes toward her. Then she was back in the vault, Percy in her hands. It breathed. That night, if one could still call it a night, she sat in the center of the great chamber, Percy nestled in her lap, surrounded by the stories she had saved and those she hadn't reached in time. Around her, the dolls pulsed gently like fireflies in sleep, and above her in the far ceiling of the vault, a single star appeared. Not drawn, not imagined. Real. Something from the outside pushing in. Proof that the world above had not forgotten entirely, that even in disbelief, something remained. And perhaps, just perhaps, someone was beginning to remember her. For a long while, Erin simply watched the star. It hovered there in the ceiling of the vault, motionless and perfect, a pinprick of genuine light in a place built from memory and shadow. It didn't flicker like a flame or shift like the flickering emotions of the dolls around her. It was steady, anchored by something stronger than imagination. It was unmistakably real, and its presence shifted something inside her. Not alarm, not fear, but a deep sense of being seen, as if someone from the world above had stumbled close enough to the veil, leaned just far enough toward belief, and felt her there on the other side. She stood slowly, Percy still cradled in one arm, and walked toward the center of the chamber where the lines of story intersected. The star's light followed her, not as a beam, but as gravity, gently drawing her toward whatever had pierced the boundary. She reached the midpoint of the room and stopped listening. The silence wasn't empty. It vibrated with anticipation, as if the vault itself was holding its breath. Then a whisper, soft, broken, but unmistakably real. "En Lyra." The name struck her like a bell and echo through every part of her she had built, buried, or forgotten. Not Erin. Not even the guardian. Lyra. The name she had given herself before the world demanded definitions, before classrooms and bills and funeral homes. It wasn't just a name. It was the vessel for every truth she had swallowed, every dream she had hidden, every fear she had disguised as logic. And someone had spoken it. She didn't respond with words. She stepped back beneath the star, tilted her head upward, and felt, not like remembering, but like being remembered. The moment rippled outward. The dolls around her stirred, and a few of them flickered more brightly than usual. One, a rabbit with a cracked porcelain face and a velvet ribbon, whispered a name of its own into the space around them. Another, shaped like a bear with mismatched button eyes, twitched with excitement. The real world was remembering, not all at once, not in full, but someone had returned to the place where Lyra once whispered secrets to the dark. Someone had reopened a drawer, flipped through an old sketchbook, or heard a name in a dream, and spoken it aloud without knowing why. Fitch materialized beside her, not dramatically, just there, as if he'd always been standing in her shadow. "She's close," he said. "The one who believed in you. She's trying to find you again." Erin blinked. "But I'm not her anymore. Doesn't matter. She's still looking for the version she remembers. And that's how it starts. First belief, then question, then contact." She turned to him. "What happens if she finds me?" "You'll be both," Fitch replied, voice calm. "Her memory and your truth." Erin glanced again at the vault, this quiet kingdom of half-remembered things, and then at the star above the one piercing the darkness like a promise. "But what if I don't want to leave this place?" Fitch didn't answer right away. He crouched beside her and plucked a thread of story from the air, watching it twist and shimmer in his fingers like a strand of silver smoke. This place is real because of belief. But belief changes. It evolves. If the people who created it forget, this too fades. She felt a sharp stab of dread. "Will it collapse?" "No," he said gently. "Not yet. But it needs connection. Without that, the dolls become static. The seams fray. The vault becomes brittle." Erin understood. The place she had come to call home was never meant to be a fortress. It was a bridge, a reservoir of stories waiting not just to be stored, but returned. She looked down at Percy, who now curled softly against her, threads of warmth pulsing through its fabric. The child who had loved Percy hadn't entirely let go. Erin had salvaged him just in time, and maybe someone had done the same for her. "Then I need to find her," she said. Fitch nodded. "She's at the edge, right now, scared, unsure, but open. How do I reach her?" Fitch gestured behind them. Where there had once been solid wall, a passage now opened a narrow corridor lined with flickering lights, each one a heartbeat, a breath, a fading thought. The path was unstable, unformed. It led not to a door, but to a place in between. A seam. "You won't be the same when you return," Fitch said. "And she won't see you as you were, but she will know you." Erin hesitated only once more. Then she handed Percy to Fitch. "Keep him safe." Fitch accepted the doll, holding it like something sacred. "I will. And when you come back, we'll tell the others your story." With that, Erin stepped into the corridor. She did not walk. She remembered. She let herself unspool, dissolve into the gentle hum of belief and nostalgia, drift down the ribbon of awareness that had been carved by someone's longing. She moved like a memory, looking for a host, not to haunt, but to reconnect. And far above, in a quiet bedroom, a young woman stirred in her sleep mouth, shaping a name she hadn't spoken since childhood. Lyra, and the seam pulled tighter. The corridor was not built of walls or air, but woven from fragments, echoes of childhood, the weightless scent of old blankets, the faint scratching of crayons on paper, the feel of sun-warmed floorboards beneath bare feet. It shifted with every step. Erin didn't quite take her form, melting into the passage, her memories bleeding into its seams like dye into water. She wasn't just walking, she was becoming smaller, lighter, younger, her shape collapsing into the rhythm of the girl she used to be, the one who whispered to shadows and made promises to empty spaces with absolute faith they would listen. She passed through a memory of a hallway lined with wallpaper animals, through the static-laced hush of a TV left on overnight, through a flash of hands clapping out a rhythm on knees and carpet. She felt the tug of something sweet and painful nostalgia sharpened into a blade. This wasn't just a journey. It was a return. Then suddenly she was still. The corridor opened not abruptly, but like curtains drawn back by a hesitant hand. She stood at the edge of a room both familiar and impossible. It was a child's bedroom, dimly lit by a nightlight shaped like a moon. The wallpaper was peeling in spots, curling at the edges, but the room was clean organized the way a grieving heart keeps things sacred. A small bookshelf held only 5 books each one, worn along the spine. The bed was unmade, the covers bunched, a shape curled beneath them. A girl no more than 7 lay facing the wall, her back to Aaron, one arm clutching a pillow close. Her shoulders rose and fell slowly, the quiet rhythm of someone not quite asleep, not quite awake. Aaron didn't speak. She moved forward silently, her bare feet making no sound on the creaking floor. She paused near the edge of the bed, watching the girl's hand. It twitched, once fingers curling tighter. The air in the room was thick, not heavy, but charged. It held the weight of everything unsaid between belief and doubt. Then the girl spoke. "I knew you'd come." Aaron's breath caught. The voice was small, raw from crying, yet full of certainty. "I waited. Even when they said I was too old to believe. Even when they threw away the stories." Aaron slowly knelt beside the bed. "What's your name?" she asked softly. The girl rolled over and Aaron saw her face, tear-streaked but bright, wide-eyed, with a look that pierced deeper than any mirror could. "I don't know anymore," the girl whispered, "but I remember yours." "Lyra." Aaron's chest tightened. "I found the doll you left behind," the girl continued. "The one with the missing button and the funny yarn hair. I thought maybe if I held it again, you'd hear me." "I did," Aaron replied, voice shaking. "I heard you all the way down." The girl sat up. "Are you real now?" "I think I've always been real. But I needed you to believe again. That's what brought me back." The girl nodded, as if that made perfect sense. She reached under her pillow and pulled out a small figure, ragged, faded, missing an ear. "The old doll. I kept it hidden, even when they told me to throw it away. Even when I didn't remember why it mattered." Aaron reached for it, her fingers brushing the fabric. The moment they touched, the room changed, not dramatically, subtly. The wallpaper softened. The light glowed warmer. The air no longer vibrated with tension, but with quiet harmony. The boundary between this space and the vault behind her pulsed, acknowledging the connection. The seam was sealed. "I have to go back soon," Aaron said gently. "I'm part of something now. I protect the place where dreams go when people forget them." The girl looked down. "Will I forget again?" "Not this time," Aaron said. "You made the bridge. You remembered my name. You remembered you. That's the key." The girl leaned forward and wrapped her arms around Aaron, small and trembling. It wasn't the hug of a child to a stranger. It was reunion, echo, meeting, echo, dream, embracing memory. Aaron held her until the edges of the room began to blur, the color seeping out like watercolor on wet paper. Her time here was ending. The vault was calling her back, but something had changed. Now she had left a mark, a tether in the waking world. As the room faded, the girl whispered, "Will you come back?" Aaron smiled. "Not in the way you expect, but yes, when the night gets too quiet. Listen, you'll feel me in the corners." And then Aaron let go. The room vanished in a hush, and the corridor reformed around her like a gentle current catching a drifting boat. She floated backward, not with fear, but with peace. She had found the connection, repaired the name, and somewhere above, in a quiet room filled with shadows and books, a girl would wake with a warm feeling in her chest, holding a tattered doll and smiling for reasons she couldn't fully explain. Aaron returned to the vault not as a visitor, but as something more. Not the seamkeeper, not the forgotten, but the remembered. The transition back into the vault was not abrupt. It was like slipping beneath warm water after drifting through a dream, soft, total, seamless. Aaron opened her eyes to the familiar low thrum of the stone chamber, to the glow of thread lines humming gently across the dolls like pulses under skin. The air held a different texture now. It no longer pressed inward like a secret trying to stay hidden. It breathed with her. It welcomed her. She stood slowly, feeling the weight of return in her bones. But it wasn't a burden. It was anchoring. She was more real now than she had ever been, as if walking through the veil and back had stitched something into place that had always been loose. Across the chamber, Fitch stood waiting with Percy in his arms. The little doll blinked slowly as Aaron approached its stitched mouth, curled in something dangerously close to a smile. Fitch handed it back without a word, though his eyes lingered on her longer than usual, studying something in her face. "You found her," he said finally. Aaron nodded. She remembered. "That's rare. She was strong, stronger than you were once." Aaron didn't argue. She had once buried herself so deep inside the noise of adulthood, she'd forgotten her own name. But not the girl. Not this time. Fitch moved to the edge of the chamber and motioned toward the walls. "Something happened while you were gone. Others are waking." She turned and saw it. The dolls were stirring. Not all at once. Not like an army. But gradually like plants turning toward light. Dolls that had sat dormant for years now trembled faintly with heat threads vibrating with the first whispers of belief returning. Some pulsed in their hearts dimly, yes, but steadily, as if someone had spoken their name aloud for the first time in decades. One by one, the forgotten were being remembered. A girl's drawing unearthed in a dusty box. A photograph posted to a forum with a comment, "I used to have one just like this." A half-finished song hummed in the back of someone's mind on a rainy afternoon. Each of those fragile moments of memory sent a tremor down into the vault, and the vault responded. The chamber began to hum louder. Fitch leaned in close. "You've opened a new channel." When she remembered you, it reconnected something greater, and now others are following that thread. Aaron felt the truth of it ripple through her fingertips. She moved instinctively toward the central circle Percy nestled under her arm. The ground beneath her vibrated more sharply now, like the very foundation of the vault was stretching, widening its reach. For the first time she noticed what lay beyond the edges of the chamber, a faint curvature like a horizon. The vault wasn't a room. It was a world, and it was growing. She reached the center and placed Percy back in his alcove, now fully awakened. The little doll settled into the stone like a seed returning to soil. Threads of glowing memory curled from his body and shot outward into the air, finding others connecting. One thread touched a doll shaped like a dragon, another brushed a velvet fox with mismatched button eyes. And slowly, they too began to pulse. Aaron knelt and placed both hands on the floor. This time she did not speak. The vault spoke through her. The stories began to shift and unwind around her like vines moving toward the sun. Whole narratives unfolded, quick, quiet flashes of childhoods, relived in dreams, names whispered again during therapy sessions or in grief-stricken journals, toy chests cracked open in basements by sons who had become fathers themselves. Each memory sent a new wave of warmth across the chamber. Each one strengthened the seam. She felt herself dissolving not into nothing, but into meaning. No longer a boundary keeper. She was part of the loom now. A node in the great web of belief, memory, and story. She belonged to the rhythm of forgetting and remembering, and the space in between. Fitch stood at a distance, his form gently flickering. "You won't need me soon," he said. "You'll still be here. I always am." Aaron rose and turned to face him. "Are you real?" Fitch smiled, that old mischievous smile. "I'm what remains when too many dreams are left half-formed. I'm the silence kids pretend not to be scared of. The rule breaker in the shadows. The flicker behind your eyelids just before sleep. I'm not real in the way you are, but I matter in the same way. He stepped back, fading slightly into the soft darkness behind him. And you, Lyra, are no longer just a keeper. You're becoming a story worth telling. The hum of the vault deepened, wrapping around her like a lullaby. Erin stood tall in the growing light of memory, her hands glowing faintly now. Not with fire, but with story thread lines of shimmering connection running from her chest to the walls, to the dolls, to the outside world. She wasn't afraid. Not of being forgotten. Not of being remembered. She existed now between both states. She was the seam and the scar, the bridge and the boundary. And far above in the world of sun and clocks and waking breath, a dozen people paused mid-sentence, mid-scroll, mid-step, as a strange sense of familiarity brushed past them. The sense that someone they had once loved or imagined or feared had just walked by again. Just for a second, and the vault stirred deeper. The boundary between the vault and the waking world had always been a veil, gossamer, fluttering, nearly invisible. But now it rippled, constantly stirred, not by wind, but by attention. Somewhere above, people were remembering things they didn't even know. They had forgotten a toy tucked inside an old shoebox, a name whispered in a fever dream, a childhood drawing found behind a cracked bookshelf. Each flicker of recollection sent a thread downward into Erin's world, and the vault drank it all in. She wandered through its corridors, no longer feeling like a visitor or even a guardian. She moved like one of the stories herself, silent, aware, necessary. Each chamber now buzzed with more than static. Conversations flickered, laughter from distant times echoed faintly against the stone, and dolls that once sat cold and still now leaned toward her as she passed, sensing in her the weight of connection. The vault was changing. It was growing, yes, but not outward, not like cities sprawling into fields. It grew inward, into depth, into richness. The stories weren't just being recovered, they were evolving. When someone remembered a doll, it no longer appeared in its original form alone. It arrived layered with meaning, how it felt to hold it, what it smelled like when damp with tears, the taste of the birthday cake it once sat beside, the moment it was hidden under a bed from monsters no one else believed in. Erin reached a new corridor she'd never seen before. Its walls weren't stone. They were made of paper, pages overlapping and curling with age, held in place by golden pins of memory. She brushed a hand against one and felt the whole corridor react. Words whispered against her skin, sentences in languages she didn't recognize. It wasn't nonsense, it was childhood language. The way kids speak when they think no one is listening, when they invent syllables to hold feelings too big for adult mouths. In the center of the paper corridor sat a single figure, a doll without form, faceless, colorless, incomplete. But around it fluttered dozens of scraps, pieces of names, bits of song lyrics, laughter. Erin knelt before it. The doll trembled. Not all memories come back whole. Fitch's voice murmured from behind her. He was not visible, but his presence was a warmth in the shadows. Some only return in pieces. Some only want to. Erin studied the doll. This one's never been fully believed in, not yet. Maybe it was made and forgotten in the same breath. Maybe it lived in the quiet space between a child's hope and a parent's indifference. She reached out. The moment her fingers touched its fabric, the paper walls shifted. Scenes spiraled into view, disconnected, disjointed, but rich. A girl humming a song while riding in the back seat of a car, a flashlight under blankets, a puddle of tears soaked into the edge of a journal. The faceless doll began to glow faintly, forming the curve of a chin, the outline of a hand. Not fully, not yet, but enough to hold shape. "Can I name it?" Erin asked. "You can," Fitch said, "but its real name will come from someone else. When they're ready." Erin leaned closer and whispered, "Until then, I'll call you Hollow. The doll blinked twice, and something behind it shifted. A door. Not like the one she had passed through before. This one wasn't an exit. It was a mirror, not to her appearance but to her belief. The reflection didn't show her face. It showed moments, her moments. The time she made a friend out of a broken spoon and a thread of yarn. The night she cried herself to sleep after her mother called her too old for make-believe. The afternoon she told Fitch for the first time, "You're not real." Each one still hurt. Each one now mattered. She stepped closer to the mirror. The reflection pulsed and the space around it deepened, became a pool rather than a pain. Not water memory. Not past truth. Erin reached forward and her fingers sank in. Not cold. Not warm. Simply accepting. Behind her, the vault held its breath. She pulled her hand back, dripping with shimmer, and turned to Hollow. The doll reached up and touched the drops still hanging from her fingers. They soaked in instantly, and its body solidified a bit more. A nose. A shoulder. A faint whimper of recognition. Not from the doll, but from somewhere far above, a gasp from a boy dreaming of a friend he never quite knew he missed. Erin smiled. Hollow would be okay. More than okay. Ready? She stood, brushing a strand of light from her hair. Around her, the corridor folded softly inward, paper pages, fluttering closed like sighs. The mirror faded, but the thread remained a single golden line, stretching back through the seam, up through the forgotten corners of the world. Erin followed it, not to leave, but to see, to witness, to understand how many more like Hollow waited. And as she walked, the vault behind her pulsed again, not louder, but deeper. Its heartbeat no longer just hers, but shared by thousands who'd unknowingly left pieces of themselves behind. It was becoming a world, and she, its breath, its voice, its memory, was only beginning to see how vast it could be. The golden thread led Erin deeper, not downward nor outward, but into a part of the vault that defied direction altogether. This space wasn't built from memory alone, but from yearning. The aching space in a heart when it reaches for something it doesn't yet know it's missing. Here, the vault breathed with a slow rhythm, less like lungs and more like tide. There were no walls, only layers, transparent veils of light and sound suspended in air like drifting silk. Each layer shimmered with something unsaid, something almost remembered, a lullaby lost in sleep, the end of a whispered story, the warmth of arms that held you when the monsters grew too loud. Erin's footsteps didn't echo here. The ground beneath her changed with every step, sometimes wood, sometimes moss, sometimes the smooth cold of marble floors she'd never walked. She realized this place didn't respond to who she was now, but to who she had once been in the minds of others. To enter this place was to step into the impressions people had of her, of guardians, of protectors they had imagined but never fully formed. She stopped beneath a floating arch composed entirely of broken letters, fragments of unsent messages, torn diary pages, discarded stories. They twisted overhead, forming a shape that wasn't quite readable, yet still felt like a word on the tip of the tongue. Beneath it sat a doll unlike any she had seen. It had no fabric or stitching. It was made of light. Not bright, glowing light, but a dim, constant glow like embers buried in ash. Its form shifted, sometimes a girl, sometimes a wolf, sometimes a faceless figure with outstretched arms. It was all things, and nothing fully. It was possibility unchosen. Erin knelt hesitant. "Do you have a name?" The doll didn't move, but she felt it answer in her chest. Not a word, but a sensation. Not yet. And behind that, deeper still, I was almost born once. Erin understood. Some creations lived only in the breath before articulation. Some were imagined in a moment of grief or fear and never given shape. Others were invented by children too afraid to say them aloud in case they came true. This doll was one of them, a might have been. She leaned closer, and it responded, its glow pulsing gently, warming the space around her. She could feel its longing, its desire to be chosen, to be remembered, to be real. "You were close," she whispered. "Someone almost brought you into the world." The doll shimmered again, and Aaron saw at a flash of memory that wasn't hers. A child sitting beneath a staircase, drawing on the back of an envelope. They scribbled with a broken crayon, humming a song no one else knew. The figure in the drawing, this doll stood between the child and the darkness shielding them. And then a loud voice upstairs, a drawer slamming. The child stuffed the envelope into a floorboard crack and never returned to it. Aaron reached out, brushing the light form gently. "I think you were already real," she said. "You did your job even if no one knew." The doll pulsed again, its shape stabilizing for a brief second into a tall, graceful silhouette with wings of smoke. Then it folded back into ember light and floated upward, drifting toward the vault ceiling, where memory turned into stars. It would wait perhaps forever for its child to remember. But now it had a name in her heart, Shield. Aaron stood slowly and followed the golden thread again, now noticing others branching from it, silver, green, crimson, each one leading to another corner of almost memory. Each thread was a tether, waiting for touch. And in that moment, she realized the vault wasn't just a repository of what had been forgotten. It was a nursery for what had never been fully imagined, an archive of potential. As she moved through this tapestry of unspoken belief, she felt herself changing once more. Her skin tingled with resonance, her breath aligned to the rhythm of distant lullabies. The lines on her palms glowed faintly, tracing stories older than her name. This was no longer about recovering the past. It was about midwifing the future, helping ideas be born whole, giving shelter to the fragile beginnings of wonder. Fitch appeared again, though his form was more translucent now, flickering like the edge of a dream. "You're drifting into the deeper layers," he said. "You should be careful." "I'm not afraid," Aaron answered. "You should be," he said with a half smile. "Fear keeps you tethered to form. Without it, you could unravel. Become part of this place, just another echo in the vault." "I thought that's what I already was." "Not yet, but you're close." He stepped aside, revealing a spiral staircase that hadn't been there moments ago. It curved downward, its railings woven from the handles of forgotten lunchboxes and the straps of old backpacks. A child's shoe dangled from one spindle. The air beneath it was colder, thicker. Aaron could hear a hum, low melodic, almost like humming from underwater. "This path leads to the hollowings," Fitch said. Places where belief was severed violently, where things were lost, not faded. Dangerous, even for you. "Why show it to me?" "Because you're ready. Because they need you." Aaron placed a hand on the rail. It trembled under her touch, not with fear, but with memory. The vault would not hide these places from her any longer. She descended slowly, the spiral tightening as it dropped each step, revealing a sound, a scent, a sensation left behind in pain. And somewhere far below, something stirred. Not monstrous, not evil, but heavy with abandonment. She didn't turn back. She was the remembered, and it was time to find the ones who were not. Each step downward into the hollowings was a conversation with loss. Not the quiet, fading kind. This was severance, sharp and echoing the kind that left a wound in the shape of absence. Aaron descended with deliberate grace, one hand grazing the cool railing, her breath steady even as the light above dimmed, and the familiar hum of the vault gave way to a silence so total it felt carved. She knew now that the vault had not only gathered what was forgotten gently, it also held what had been discarded, erased, banished from memory out of fear, shame, or grief, too deep for daylight. And those memories festered. The first chamber she reached was small, almost shrine-like. It pulsed faintly with a deep purple hue cast from the walls themselves. At the center sat a figure slumped forward, a doll barely intact, its body scorched, its limbs fused together by something that looked like melted wax. Its face was obscured by a cloth mask, and beside it lay a single broken teacup with the name Mimi scratched crudely into the porcelain. The energy here was different. Not hostile, but hurt. A wound that hadn't been allowed to heal. Erin knelt beside the doll and felt a wave of nausea roll through her chest. Images spilled forward, clashing voices, a door slammed hard enough to shake shelves, a child covering her ears under a table, while porcelain shattered behind her. Mimi had been a friend, a safety net, an emotional firewall, and then one day thrown into the fire during a tantrum that wasn't hers. A casualty of adult pain, not childhood error. She had no grave, no words of apology. Just ash and silence. Erin didn't try to fix her, not here. Instead, she placed both palms gently around Mimi's sides, not to restore, but to witness, to acknowledge. And with that simple touch, the scorched fabric softened slightly, the waxen crust beginning to flake. Not heal, just breathe. The chamber's purple hue shifted warmer like bruises fading. When Erin stood again, the hallway ahead had changed. It stretched longer, but the path had become clearer. The hollowings were not chaotic. They were structured around intensity, each chamber an echo chamber of a specific fracture, abandonment, betrayal, denial. The next room radiated a sharp, metallic chill. On the floor, tiles glimmered like polished linoleum, and in the corner, a small figure sat propped against the wall, a wind-up robot toy, its wind key snapped off and lying nearby. Its eyes blinked erratically. Erin stepped inside and the chill deepened. The robot's hum began low, like a heartbeat on the verge of stopping. The memory here surged toward her with violence, a boy in a sterile hallway watching his father walk away down a corridor that never seemed to end. The robot had been a birthday gift from a year that no one celebrated again. Its purpose had not been companionship, but distraction. And when it failed to distract enough, it was forgotten in a box labeled Donate. But no one came to take it. It ended up buried in dust. Erin didn't speak to it. Instead, she sat beside it, her shoulder touching its cool metal. After a long silence, she gently retrieved the broken key and placed it in its lap. The robot didn't move, but its blinking stabilized. One red light in its chest glowed brighter. Not hope, not forgiveness, just recognition. That was enough. The hollowings continued, each chamber a scar, each memory like breath held too long. Some dolls refused to wake. Others tried and collapsed back into stillness, the pain too fresh to allow form. Erin didn't force any of them. She simply bore witness. And slowly, the air around her began to change. What had been silence now whispered. The walls didn't speak in voices, but in pressure, in feeling and small sounds that only made sense when your heart had softened enough to listen the click of a light switch at bedtime, the creak of stairs at midnight, the drag of blankets over cold feet. It was language beyond words, understood only by the ones who'd once needed these dolls to survive the dark. When Erin reached the final chamber, she knew before she entered that something waited there, not broken, not forgotten, but hidden. There was no door, just a curve in the passage, a narrowing of space until she had to crawl. Her fingers brushed velvet walls, the texture rich and soft, like the inside of a music box. Then she emerged into a room, unlike any she had seen in the vault. This one was not ancient or crumbling. It was new, barely formed. A single crib stood in the center, perfectly intact. Inside, a figure curled into itself, a doll so pristine it looked untouched. But the air told a different story. It was heavy, too heavy. The kind of air that settles when grief has no release. Aaron stepped closer. The doll's face was serene, but its hands were clenched tightly around something fabric shredded at the edges. A hospital tag. No name, just a date. Recently created, recently lost. She understood immediately. This was a memory so fresh it hadn't even been buried yet. It had slipped through the cracks of a mother's unfinished dream, fallen into the vault before it could be cradled in the world above. This wasn't a forgotten toy. This was a presence that had never been fully realized. Tears welled in Erin's eyes, and she knelt beside the crib. She didn't reach in. She only whispered, "I see you." The doll stirred. No breath, no cry. Just a hand releasing the tag fingers, relaxing. And somewhere far above, a woman in a darkened room sat bolt upright, a sudden warmth in her chest, and no idea why. Her hand moved to her belly, already flattened. Her tears didn't stop, but this time they fell with less weight. Back in the vault, Erin stood, and for the first time, the hollowings weren't just a place of grief. They were a place of grace. The return from the hollowings was not a retreat, but a rising, as if the vault itself gently lifted Erin from those heavy layers back into the realms of memory that breathed more freely. Yet she didn't come back untouched. The sorrow of what she had witnessed clung to her skin like fog, but not in a way that weakened her. It clothed her in purpose. The vault, sensing the change, responded. Where once its walls glowed with dormant threads, now they shimmered like veins beneath translucent parchment, pulsing with renewed life. As Erin stepped into the wide central chamber again, she felt it fully. For the first time, the vault was no longer only a place. It was a living, dreaming organism, fed by remembrance, healed by witnessing. Fitch stood near the old archway, arms crossed, watching her silently. He looked more solid than before, less like a flicker at the edge of vision, and more like someone who might cast a shadow. Erin paused before him, and for the first time in their long, strange knowing, she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "You went deeper than I thought you would," he said. "I had to." Erin replied, voice calm. They were still waiting, even after all this time. "And now you carry them. I carry their echoes, not their endings. There's a difference." He nodded slowly. "You're becoming what I never could be." "What's that?" "A conduit. I was a gatekeeper, a keeper of order. But you're turning the vault into a sanctuary, a place not just of storage, but of reinvention." Erin turned away from him and looked at the great stone map across the floor, the layout of all chambers' corridors, hollowings, and forgotten wings. Except now, new symbols had begun to appear. Not etched, but grown. Places she hadn't yet visited. Names that hadn't yet been spoken. Silhouettes of dolls that didn't yet exist, waiting to be believed into form. One symbol in particular pulsed faintly, a spiral that turned inward, but never ended. It hovered at the edge of the map, past even the hollowings. "What's that?" she asked, pointing. Fitch stepped beside her, his voice lowered. "That is the boundaryless. No borders, no form. It's where stories go when they've never had any container. Not even a whisper. The deepest potential. The most dangerous kind." Erin felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, anticipation. She knew she was being called, that her journey was far from over. But before she could ask another question, the vault rippled again, and this time the disturbance didn't come from within. It came from above. A new memory was descending. Not just any memory. This one was loud, jagged, almost violent in its urgency. The air around her vibrated like static, and the dolls lining the walls turned their heads toward the round window at the top of the chamber. A shape began to fall, to plummet from the seam that connected their world to the waking one. It hit the center of the vault with a shuddering impact, cracking the stone beneath it and sending out a shockwave of silence. Aaron rushed forward. At the epicenter of the strike was a figure twisted, struggling to form itself. A doll. Not quite. A hybrid of cloth and wire hair made of burnt thread limbs fused from paper and bark. Its face was blank, no eyes, no mouth, but its entire body shook like it had been ripped violently out of someone's psyche. Fitch stepped forward, brows furrowed. "That's not a memory," he muttered. "It's a trauma construct." Aaron's heart skipped. Someone sent it here. No, someone couldn't contain it, and now it's looking for form. The construct twitched on the ground, and the vault shuddered in response. Around them, lights flickered. Threads snapped and recoiled. Dolls that had begun to glow went dim. The sanctuary wavered. "It doesn't belong here," Fitch said grimly. "It's too raw, too unshaped." Aaron didn't move, but she didn't run either. Instead, she stepped toward it, one foot, then another, until she stood at its side. The construct flailed its limbs, spiraling out like antennae, searching for belief, for validation, for identity. Aaron knelt, placed her hand over the center of its chest. She didn't speak. She simply let it feel her presence. Let it know it wasn't alone, and slowly, painfully, it began to calm. Its limbs stilled. The threads of bark and paper settled. The shaking stopped. The blank face didn't grow features, but it pulsed once like a single shallow breath. Aaron exhaled. "It's not trying to destroy," she said softly. "It's trying to be held." Fitch knelt beside her, still cautious. "But it's incomplete. A wound turned inside out. Then we give it time," she whispered. "Let it be here. Let it rest. Let it become." The vault steadied. Threads reconnected. Dolls blinked back to light. And in the center of the floor, the trauma construct was no longer convulsing. It lay quiet, like a newborn. In the moment before its first cry, Aaron stood slowly, her eyes locked on the horizon of the vault's ever-expanding map. The boundaryless still pulsed, and she knew now more than ever before that if she didn't go there, if she didn't face the stories that had never been allowed to begin, then they would find their way into the vault. Another way. Louder. Angrier. Hungrier. "Fitch," she said quietly when I crossed into that place, "I might not come back the same." He looked at her and smiled, a little sad, a little proud. "No one ever does." Then she stepped toward the spiral, and the vault for the first time opened itself completely. The moment Aaron stepped into the spiral, the floor ceased to exist beneath her feet. Gravity softened, then surrendered entirely. There was no falling, no rising, only motion without orientation. She was surrounded by nothing, and everything: colors without names, sounds without frequencies, textures that pulsed between silk and static. The world around her bent in ways that defied geometry. Here in the boundaryless belief wasn't something summoned, it was the fabric of reality itself. Thought carried weight. Emotion shaped space. To imagine was to build. To fear was to destroy. She kept her breath steady, anchoring herself to the rhythm she had learned from the vault. She thought of Hollow's trembling hands, of the robot's blinking eyes, of the doll in the crib letting go of the tag. She repeated their names in her mind, like mantras, each one a foothold on a slope made of pure uncertainty. Gradually, the haze thickened into form. Not solid, but implied, like a dream taking shape before the sleeper awakens. She stepped onto something that resembled a path, a winding walkway made of shattered mirrors, each shard reflecting a version of herself she didn't recognize. One was laughing too hard. Another had eyes sunken with exhaustion. One walked hand in hand with a child whose face was blurred. One was a doll, hollow-eyed and smiling too wide. They didn't speak. They only watched her. The path led to a gateway of bone and shadow, an archway that breathed. She passed beneath it, and instantly she was somewhere new. It was a town, not one she knew, but one that felt familiar in that twisted way dreams often do. Streets of broken cobblestones curved like question marks. Windows stared outward, dark and blinking. Houses leaned into one another as if whispering secrets. In the center of the town square stood a well not made of stone or wood, but of stitched-together thoughts. It pulsed with a faint pink light and let off a sound like a heartbeat slowed to a crawl. As she approached it, the wind picked up not cold, but deliberate. It pressed against her, testing her resolve as if warning her that what lay ahead could not be undone. She looked into the well. There was no bottom, only a face. Not a doll, not a person, something between. Its skin was stitched from paper. Its hair was smoke. Its mouth, when it opened, revealed no teeth, only pages and pages flipping in a wind that did not blow. It spoke, but not aloud. "You are not the first." Erin stood tall despite the shiver crawling up her spine. "What am I not the first to do? To come here thinking you could rewrite what was never written? To name the unnamed? To rescue the forsaken?" She stepped closer. Then what happened to the others? They became part of the boundary. Their voices softened into the static. Their forms drifted into suggestion. Their purpose diluted until they remembered nothing but the wanting. Erin swallowed hard. "But you remember them." The well pulsed. "I hold what they left, the pieces they couldn't carry out." She nodded slowly, realizing the truth. This place, this thing, it wasn't a monster. It was a reliquary, a storehouse for unrealized identity, for half-born imaginings and stories that never survived their first breath. And now, it was full aching, ready to rupture unless someone could bring meaning to its contents. "I'm not here to rewrite," she said. "I'm here to remember, to hold space, to listen." A pause, then a shift. The well's glow dimmed, and the town around her began to pulse with faint light. Windows lit with silhouettes. Doors creaked open. The broken cobblestones reassembled underfoot. Something was happening. The boundaryless was responding to her presence, not rejecting, not devouring, but adjusting, recognizing. She turned from the well and walked into the town. Each step brought her to a new fragment, a doll's voice whispering a secret never spoken aloud, a carousel horse made of bone and fabric turning slowly in the silence, a music box with a single note missing. Each was a thought never finished, a friend never formed a story abandoned mid-sentence. She didn't try to fix them. She named them. She knelt beside the carousel and whispered, "Spin." She held the music box and whispered, "Almost." She touched the doll's lips and whispered, "Kept," and something miraculous began. The town awakened, not fully, not cleanly, but enough to breathe, enough to speak, enough to ask with no voice and no face. "Can we come with you?" Erin looked up. The question wasn't from one figure. It came from the town itself, from the spaces between, from the boundary's own longing to cross into something fuller. She opened her arms. Yes, the wind rushed inward. The air thickened. The town collapsed, not in destruction, but in transference. Its pieces unlatched from their shapes and spiraled into the golden thread that had once led her here. They wrapped around her, not weighing her down, but becoming part of her stories not yet told, waiting patiently in her breath, in her blood. The gateway reformed behind her. The spiral called again, and as she stepped back through, she did not come alone. The spiral retracted as she crossed, not closing, but folding like a door that knew it might open again. Erin emerged back into the heart of the vault, yet everything was different. The air no longer simply shimmered. It vibrated with memory and potential, intertwined. Threads, New threads looped outward from her shoulders, golden and silver crimson, and pale blue trailing like the ribbons of a maypole. Each one pulsed faintly tethered to fragments she had brought from the boundaryless thoughts that had never found form, now humming softly within her presence. The vault responded immediately. Statues shuddered and took breath. Dolls long silent stirred. The floor glowed beneath her with stories unfolding as roots underground, unseen but unstoppable. Fitch was waiting, standing motionless near the mirror wall that once reflected her with delay. Now her image appeared there instantly, and beside it others. Faint shapes, blurred not from forgetting, but from having never been truly imagined until now. They gathered around her reflection like constellations seeking arrangement. He didn't speak at first, but when he did, his voice was almost reverent. "You brought them with you. I didn't think it could be done. They weren't lost," she said softly. "They were never allowed to begin. Now they've been invited." He looked at her, then at the vault walls, which had begun to shift in subtle organic ways. Chambers she'd never entered now pulsed with dormant light. Corridors once collapsed unfolded like pages turning themselves. In one corner, a group of dolls silently gathered around the cradle where the trauma construct rested. It had changed its limbs now, smooth its face, still blank but peaceful, its chest glowing with a steady pulse. "Will they survive?" she asked. "Some," Fitch replied. "Some will fade, some will return, but many will stay now. Because you remembered them before they even existed." She walked slowly to the center of the vault. The old map on the stone floor had transformed completely. No longer a rigid grid of chambers, it now resembled a living, breathing tapestry, veins and paths interwoven, pulsing like neural branches across the stone. And in the center, beneath her feet, glowed a new symbol, a spiral wrapped in a halo of light. The boundary folded into belonging. As she stood there, the dolls began to move, not all at once, and not chaotically, but as if in ritual. Some stepped down from their alcoves. Others emerged from behind archways. Each one bore the same expression, not joy, not fear, but recognition. Erin turned slowly as they gathered around her, forming a wide circle. She didn't feel worshipped. She felt seen. A small voice broke the silence. "Not Fitch, not the vault." A child's voice. "Can you tell us a story?" Erin turned, eyes searching. A young girl stood beside a threadbare bear with button eyes and a cracked porcelain rabbit. She wasn't glowing. She wasn't flickering like the others. She was real living, and impossibly standing inside the vault. Erin knelt. "How did you get here?" The girl shrugged. "I was dreaming, but I wanted to come. I think I've always known this place." Fitch's voice was soft behind her. "One of the gifted. Some children slip through when the veil is thinnest. Most forget when they wake. Some don't." Erin looked at the girl. "Do you know why you came?" The girl nodded. "You were lonely. So were they." She gestured to the dolls now gathered like a silent choir. "You didn't want to be the only one who remembered." Erin smiled. It wasn't sad, it was full. "No, I didn't." She stood, and the dolls moved aside as she led the girl toward the heart of the vault. A pedestal formed there, smooth as river stone. Upon it, a book, blank, waiting. Erin lifted the cover, and for a moment nothing happened. Then the pages filled not with ink, but with light. Scenes began to write themselves, moments she had witnessed, dolls she had named, stories barely spoken. The boundaryless had not just returned with her, it had begun to express itself. Through her hands, through the vault. "Can I write something?" the girl asked. Erin passed her the book. The girl pressed her fingers to the page. When she pulled away, a new doll stood at her side. Nothing elaborate, just a small soft thing with a scarf made of starlight and a smile that flickered like candlelight. "She's called Mara," the girl said. "She helps you sleep when you're scared of what you might dream." And with that, the vault accepted another, not from forgetting, not from fear, but from creation. Aaron looked to Fitch, and for the first time his form didn't flicker. It was whole, solid, human. "What happens now?" she asked. Fitch looked at the book, the girl, the dolls. "Now you become what the vault always needed. Not a warden, a weaver, a storyteller. And you," he smiled faintly, "I think I can rest." A hush fell over the chamber, but it wasn't empty. It was potential, breathing, vast. Somewhere far above, the sun began to rise in a world that would never know what had been healed in the shadows below. But Aaron would remember, and the vault would hold. Aaron watched as Fitch stepped back into the shadows of the vault, his figure slowly dissolving like mist returning to the morning air. There was no drama, no last farewell, no lingering look. He simply ceased to be, at least in the form he had worn. What remained was a sensation, a resonance in the stones, the threads and the gentle hush of air moving through the ancient halls. She stood in the silence that followed, not afraid, not even sad, just still. Around her, the dolls resumed their natural order, each drifting to their respective spaces like autumn leaves caught in a breeze. But now there was no sense of captivity or dormancy among them. They moved not as forgotten relics, but as participants in something larger, something growing. The vault had changed, she had changed, and the story was only beginning. The girl, still barefoot, still impossibly real, wandered between the shelves with wide, curious eyes, occasionally reaching out to touch a doll's hand or whisper something private into a painted ear. Wherever she walked, the space seemed to brighten, not literally. It was as though the presence of someone not burdened by the past allowed the vault to breathe a little more easily, as if her innocence wove fresh air into the structure's ancient lungs. Aaron followed her slowly, her own steps, deliberate as if rediscovering how it felt to walk with purpose, not rooted in fear or urgency. They came to a corridor Aaron hadn't noticed before. It wasn't new, she could tell from the dust on the stones and the way the air tasted older than the rest, but it had gone unseen, perhaps even by Fitch. The girl stopped at its threshold and turned. "This part doesn't remember what it was supposed to be," she said, voice quiet but certain. "It's trying to decide if it should become a hallway or a story." Aaron raised an eyebrow. "Can it be both?" The girl shrugged. "You're the storyteller." So Aaron stepped forward. The corridor reacted to her presence, the floor firming beneath her feet, the walls shuddering slightly as if shaking off centuries of indecision. Dim lanterns sparked to life along the sides, not flame but a glow like trapped breath. She could feel the space awakening, stretching. Shapes emerged, doors that hadn't known they were doors, windows that hadn't considered opening, niches waiting for names. The girl didn't follow this time. She remained at the threshold, waving gently. "I'll be here when you come back," she said, as if they both understood that some journeys had to be taken alone. The corridor wound deep, spiraling inward, not unlike the boundary spiral, but tighter, more intimate. Aaron passed doors with no handle symbols etched above them, some in languages she could read, others in ones she felt not understood. One door bore the image of a birdcage filled, not with feathers but eyes. Another had a spiral carved into wood, bleeding softly at the edges. Another had a simple phrase burned into the stone above it. "What you locked away still waits." She paused at this one. The door was neither beautiful nor frightening. It was plain, made of aged pine, a little warped. The doorknob was warm when her hand closed around it. Inside was a room with no walls, a memory, a presence, a confrontation. She was 6 years old again, curled on the floor beneath a kitchen table, while voices rose around her, shouts that became thunder anger, that rattled cupboards, and broke time into fragments. In the center of it all, a small doll with button eyes and yarn hair stared up at her, silent and expectant. She hadn't spoken to it in years. She had pretended it never existed. That moment under the table had been the last time she allowed herself to need something imaginary. Reality had been too loud, too hard, too immediate. But now in the vault, with the memory reassembled, the doll turned its head and spoke. "You left me when you needed me most." Erin's throat tightened. "I was told to grow up," she whispered. The doll nodded. "But you didn't grow through it. You just buried it." Silence stretched between them like thread. Then Erin knelt, eye to button eye. "I'm sorry," she said. "You were never the weakness. You were the only safe part." The doll blinked and smiled. The room folded again, and Erin found herself in the corridor, standing before the closed door. But something had changed. The vault around her felt warmer, the path ahead clearer. As she continued, the corridor began to rise. She realized she was approaching the surface. Light filtered through the end of the hallway. Real daylight tinged with gold filtered through dust and memory alike. Erin stepped into the brightness and blinked hard. She was no longer in the vault. She was in her attic room, standing in the exact spot she had been on that first strange night beneath the round window, with the apple tree swaying gently outside. The room looked the same, and utterly changed. A notebook lay on her desk, open to a blank page, and next to it sat the doll from the kitchen table. Whole, clean, waiting. The wind outside whispered through the glass, not calling her back, but inviting her to begin. For a long moment, Erin stood in the golden hush of her attic room, the sun casting honeyed beams across the wooden floor. Dust danced in the light like motes of memory, flickering silently in slow spirals, mirroring the patterns she had walked in the vault below. Everything looked the same: her bed, the bookshelf, the familiar creak in the floorboards near the door, but none of it felt unchanged. The doll on the desk, the one she had last seen, curled beneath a kitchen table in a dream-turned memory, now sat upright, legs swinging slightly off the edge of the wood, as if it had always belonged there. Its button eyes stared not at her, but slightly to the left, like it was watching something she couldn't yet see. She approached it quietly, the way one might approach a wild animal, gentle, deliberate, uncertain whether it would vanish. But the doll remained. It radiated no malevolence, no mystery, only patience. It didn't blink, didn't speak. It didn't need to. Erin reached out and touched the edge of its scarf, soft, faded with frayed ends that looked as though they had unraveled across years she could no longer account for. There was no tug of supernatural energy, no wave of visions, just presence, just stillness. Then her eyes fell on the notebook. It was new. Bound in black cloth, the edges of the pages gilded in gold that caught the sunlight like fire. She flipped it open. Every page was blank, crisp, untouched, waiting. The attic creaked softly behind her, the familiar hum of old wood breathing with time. But beneath that surface hum, she could sense something else, a current, a thrum. The vault had not closed. It had risen with her. She didn't return to the vault because the vault had never really been below. It had always been within. She sat, took a pen, and for the first time in years she began to write, not to escape, not to forget, not to understand, but to give shape, to speak what had never been said. She wrote about the dolls, about Fitch, about the spiral. She wrote about the door that bled light and the well that held faces made of pages. She wrote names she hadn't remembered until now: Anais, who had no voice but told stories with shadows; Noel, the porcelain girl who kept her fear folded in her chest like origami; the iron-limbed watcher with the clockwork eye who wept at dawn. She wrote until her hand cramped, until her breath slowed, until her eyes blurred, and when she looked up, the attic had changed again. Subtly, softly. There was a hum in the floorboards that hadn't been there before. A warmth in the walls, as if the house had leaned in to listen. Her room, once a place she had been sent to be alone, was now a room filled with company stories waiting their turn. Voices waiting for breath memories curled quietly in corners like cats at rest. As the sky outside deepened into lavender, her mother called up from below. "Dinner, Erin." For the first time in weeks, the sound didn't feel like an interruption. Erin stood stretched and smiled faintly. She glanced once more at the doll still sitting on the desk. "I'll be back," she whispered, and the doll, without moving, somehow made her feel heard. She descended the stairs slowly, each step grounding her more firmly in the now. At dinner, the conversation was light. Her father spoke about something at work. Her mother asked if she needed new sketch pads. No one mentioned the attic or the vault or the subtle transformation that had begun to glow just behind Erin's eyes. But as she chewed her food and nodded along, Erin noticed her mother pause for a moment, brow furrowing slightly as she looked past her daughter's shoulder toward the stairway. "Everything okay up there?" she asked absently. Erin smiled. "Yeah, it's just quieter now." Later in bed, with the lamp casting soft shadows across her blankets, Erin turned to her side and listened. Not for footsteps or whispers. Not for the rustle of paper-thin limbs or the sigh of some ghostly presence. She listened for something simpler, the silence that holds a space after something has been honored. It was there, stretching softly across her walls, threading through her breath. That night, she dreamed, but not of being hunted or lost or forgotten. She dreamed of doors gently opening, of dolls learning to dance again, of stories lining up like children on the first day of school, eager and terrified, holding their names close like flowers they weren't sure they were allowed to offer. And in the center of it all, the spiral turned slow, deliberate, patient, not inward this time, but outward, casting thread after thread into the darkness. Not to bind it, but to illuminate it, to show that even what is unfinished can still be sacred. Erin did not wake afraid. She did not wake alone. She woke knowing the vault would never ask her to keep it secret. It would only ask her to keep telling the truth. Morning broke not with urgency, but with a gentleness that eased through the curtains and painted Erin's room in muted gold. She opened her eyes before the alarm could sound and lay there for a while, watching the way light curved around the bookshelf, the way shadows softened under her desk. The room felt subtly reshaped, nothing overt, but like someone had dusted off its meaning and set it back down slightly closer to what it was always meant to be. She felt different, too. Not as though something had ended, but as if something essential had finally begun. Downstairs, the world moved with its usual rhythm. Toast-popping tea steeping her parents in that slow-motion morning dance of routine. Her mother asked if she had slept well, and Erin responded with a small, truthful smile. "Better than I have in years." She didn't need to say more. There were words now that only belonged on the page, and the page was waiting. After breakfast, she returned to the attic. The notebook was still on the desk, closed but humming in its own silent way. The doll remained where she left it, its head slightly tilted now, as if listening to some sound Erin couldn't hear. She sat down and opened the book again. The pages were blank once more. She frowned, flipping back, but yesterday's writing had vanished, not erased, but consumed like the vault had swallowed it into its body, keeping it somewhere deeper than ink. She didn't feel loss. She felt invited. The notebook, she now understood, wasn't for record-keeping. It was a key. And the vault had more doors. She touched the pen to the page, and without warning, her vision dissolved. No swirl, no fall, just a seamless drift. She was standing at the edge of a pond. The surface was mirror-still, reflecting a sky without stars. Trees loomed on either side, tall and lifeless, their bark gray and peeling like old wallpaper. A soft mist hung low to the ground, carrying with it the scent of lavender and something older silt wet thread broken wood. She turned slowly and saw them. Dolls. But not like before. These were malformed, stitched from desperation rather than belief. Their limbs didn't move fluidly. They jerked. Some dragged their feet, others floated inches above the earth, and all of them faced the water still as statues. At the center of the pond was an island no larger than a bed. Upon it sat a girl, not a doll, not a vision, real. Her legs were drawn to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them. Her hair was long, matted, dark with moisture. And though she stared straight ahead, Aaron could feel the pull of her presence like gravity sorrow made solid. The girl didn't speak, but Aaron knew her name before she asked Calla. Something had gone terribly wrong here. This was a memory, but not hers. This was something the vault had buried deep a corner of forgotten grief it hadn't dared revisit until now. The dolls around her began to hum, low, off-key, like a lullaby sung too many times. They shifted in place. The pond rippled. Aaron stepped forward, placing one foot onto the surface of the water. It held, not as ice, not as magic, but as trust. She crossed slowly each step, sending rings out across the reflection. When she reached the island, the girl lifted her eyes. They were not childlike. They were ancient, heavy with unspoken story. "I didn't mean to stay here," she whispered. "I just didn't know how to leave." Aaron crouched beside her. "Who left you?" Calla didn't respond immediately. She touched the water with one finger. A scene formed in the ripples. A small bedroom, a hospital bed, a little girl clutching a ragged toy. Machines, beeping, silence, then an argument in the hallway. A mother leaving, a nurse closing the door, then nothing. The doll on the bed. Calla's sat there for days, weeks, maybe longer. No one remembered to take it, and when they did, they threw it away. But belief has no respect for disposal. Aaron looked around. The malformed dolls weren't just memories. They were fragments, pieces of Calla's forgotten world things, half remembered, but too painful to reclaim. "I can help," Aaron said softly, "but only if you want to come back." "I'm scared," Calla admitted. "I don't remember what I was before this." "You don't have to," Aaron said. "We can start with what you are now." She extended her hand. Calla hesitated, then took it. The pond trembled, the dolls turned as one, and the world split not in chaos, but in rebirth. The island folded, the dolls sank into the ground, and the sky above shattered into golden threads that wove themselves into a new path beneath Aaron's feet. She held on to Calla as the vault pulled them back. They landed not in the attic, but in a chamber Aaron hadn't seen before, high-ceilinged with arched windows that looked out into nothing and everything. Starlight fell like dust across a floor made of glass. Calla blinked slowly, then stood. She looked different now. Still the same girl, but whole. Present. Not trapped. One of the windows flared. A new doll appeared on the ledge. Not tattered, not broken. Made of smooth cloth lined with gold thread. Its name shimmered in the air beside it. Calla, the one who waited. The vault had accepted her, not just as memory, as truth. Aaron turned toward the stairway that rose into darkness. More doors, more names, more stories waiting to remember themselves, and she was ready. The air within the chamber thinned, not from lack of breath, but from the rising tension of something unsaid, something unsummoned, yet hovering just beyond the veil. Aaron stood there for a moment longer, beside the new doll. Calla now reimagined, reshaped, watching the golden thread of her name still shimmering above the window ledge, before it faded gently into the vaulted ceiling. There was a peace in this moment, but not finality. A strange kind of anticipation settled over her shoulders like a cloak. She could feel the vault shifting again deep within its many unseen levels, as if her journey with Kala had loosened something older, buried beneath even Fitch's awareness. The stories she'd awakened thus far had belonged to fragments, half-lost dreams, forgotten playthings, echoes of inner childhood pains and personal phantoms. But the thread that pulled at her now was different. Not personal, not hers. The notebook reappeared at her feet. Open waiting. She picked it up without hesitation. The page was not blank this time. A name had already been written in the center. Not by her, not in her handwriting. Marantha. The ink bled slightly at the edges of the letters as if written in a storm. The name stirred something deep in Erin's bones, something not recalled, but inherited, as though her blood had once passed through someone who had whispered it under their breath in terror. The moment she spoke it aloud, the world dimmed. The chamber responded. The windows blackened. The starlight above blinked out. And in the farthest wall, a long sealed doorway cracked open, hinges groaning with the weight of centuries. Beyond it, darkness, not like the gentle shade of sleep or the soft quiet of the boundaryless, but a dense ancient black that pressed inward with its own pulse. Erin stepped toward it, fingers tight around the notebook, and entered without looking back. The hallway inside was colder than any place she had yet traveled. The walls were not stone, but wood warped and splintered, as if the passage had been carved through a great decaying tree. Branches jutted inward, gnarled and grasping, each one etched with tiny carvings, runes, sigils, some shaped like crying faces, others like crawling things half-human. The air smelled of burned paper and salt water. She walked for what felt like hours, or moments. Time frayed here. At the end of the hall stood a well. It was ancient, made of bricks that bled a slow, dark moisture. A twisted pulley system hung above it with a rope so frayed it looked like a scream pulled taut. Erin approached slowly. Something inside the well was breathing, not literally, but rhythmically, a sound like waves crashing from beneath the earth, muffled by earth and time. A single voice rose from the darkness below. "You opened the gate." Erin did not recognize the voice. It was not Marantha's. It belonged to the well itself, or the thing it held, or the memory that lived inside it. "I was just following the thread," she said. "You followed it too far." The bricks around the well groaned. The darkness inside shifted, rising just enough to form a shape. Not visible, impressionistic. A woman made of absence, her body composed of shadow, stitched into form by memory alone. "I am what they made to hold the pain they couldn't name," the voice said. "They created dolls for the forgotten vaults, for the imaginary. But for their shame they made me." Marantha, Erin whispered. The figure twitched. "I was the first doll never given a name," she said. "The first story never finished. They locked me in symbols. They buried me in warnings. And yet still, you came." "I didn't come to trap you," Erin replied. "I came to understand you." "No one understands me," Marantha said. "They only feed me." The notebook pulsed in Erin's hands. Words poured across the pages without her writing them. Fragments of other dolls, entries, confessions, half-formed prayers, stories of fear, self-loathing, abandonment. Every time a child had created a doll and then punished it in their own image. Every time shame was given limbs and buried. It all bled into the book, now coalescing into one central presence. "You carry their guilt," Erin said softly. "You became what they couldn't admit lived inside them." "I became what they feared they might be," Marantha answered. "Unloved, unlovable, a monster born of too much silence." Erin stepped to the well's edge. She looked into the darkness, not flinching. "I see you." Marantha's form rippled. "No one ever has." "You're not a monster," Erin said. "You're a story without a listener, and I'm listening." The world held its breath. The rope above the well tightened. The pulley groaned, and slowly, painfully, the bucket began to rise, not filled with water or ash or blood, but with a single item. A doll, simple, hand-stitched, pale, with one button eye and one empty socket. Its arms were wrapped in fabric inscribed with tiny words: regret, longing, hope, fear. No name embroidered across its chest, just a blank space. Aaron reached out, touched it, and in that moment the well sighed. The darkness receded, and the name Marantha burned itself into the sky above the well, not in fire, but in gold. Accepted. Aaron held the doll to her chest, not to fix it, not to redeem it, but to recognize it. The passage behind her began to dissolve. The notebook hummed. She turned and walked back through the vault, not alone, not afraid, holding the forgotten in her arms like a child who had waited too long to be heard. The passage sealed itself behind Aaron without a sound. Not with menace, not with finality, just the gentle closing of a door that had finally served its purpose. She didn't look back. The doll in her arms, light as air and heavy with story, remained silent, yet it vibrated faintly, a presence more felt than seen. Marantha, once an unnamed shadow, now had form and recognition stitched into reality, not by forgiveness, but by acknowledgement. Aaron walked slowly, deliberately, each step echoing in a hallway that no longer warped or threatened. The vault had changed again. As she moved through its expanding corridors, she noticed subtle shifts, lanterns that flickered to life. Before she reached them, alcoves that once pulsed with unease, now simply resting. The dolls she passed along the way turned their heads toward her, not with blank stares, but with quiet understanding. Some raised their hands in gestures of greeting, others simply watched, content to witness. It was no longer a prison, this place, nor a tomb. It had become what it was always meant to be, a sanctuary for stories that had been denied breath. She entered a new chamber, circular, lined with mirrors that reflected not her appearance, but moments from the vault. Calla reaching for her hand across the pond, Fitch stepping into the spiral, even the iron-limbed doll with the clockwork eye shedding a tear beneath a shattered skylight. These weren't memories in the usual sense. They were living truths, looping gently in the glass, as if offering their presence, not demanding understanding, but inviting it. In the center of the room stood a pedestal. Upon it, a glass dome. She instinctively knew what to do. She placed Marantha's doll beneath the dome. The moment her fingers left the fabric, a golden seam stitched itself across the pedestal's base, etching Marantha's name in flowing script. But unlike the others, this name did not pulse gently or shimmer faintly. It burned, not with destruction, but illumination, as if every whispered shame, every swallowed sob, every thread of abandonment had finally come home and been offered warmth. The chamber responded with silence, a deep, reverent silence like the pause after the final note of a long song when the room itself remembers how to breathe. The notebook still in Aaron's hands flipped open. Pages filled themselves, not just with names now, but with stories, beginnings that had once been endings, middles that had never dared become more. It was writing itself not as a record, but as a living document of restoration. The vault through her was rebuilding. She turned the page. The next entry was blank. No name written, no symbol, just white space. Waiting. Aaron frowned. This time the thread didn't lead her. She wasn't being pulled toward something old. This was something new. Not a memory, a possibility. She sat down on the chamber's floor, cross-legged with the notebook in her lap, and stared at the empty page. For the first time since this journey began, there was no echo, no figure whispering, no ancient path to trace. There was only stillness, then a sound, not from the vault, from above, the creak of floorboards, her house, a voice, small, fragile. Aaron, it was her mother, calling down from the attic stairs. I just wanted to see if you're okay. Aaron blinked. The notebook dimmed. The vault quieted. She stood slowly, hesitantly, unsure if she was truly meant to answer. But the pull was real. and different. She ascended the stairway that hadn't been there moments ago, spiraling upward through fading light, until the ceiling split, revealing her attic bedroom bathed in a cool dusk glow. Her mother stood in the doorway, half in shadow, wearing an expression that wasn't quite worry, but not quite ease. "You've been up here a lot," she said gently. "I thought you might be lonely." Erin met her eyes. For the first time, really met them. "I'm not," she said. "Not anymore." Her mother nodded slowly. "I used to talk to someone too," she whispered after a moment. "When I was your age. But then, well, you know how people are. They tell you to grow up. Be practical. Let go of the imaginary." She looked down, embarrassed. "I didn't tell anyone. Not even you." Erin's breath caught, and in that moment, the last thread clicked into place. The final story wasn't buried in the vault. It was here, unspoken, inherited. Not a doll left behind, but a connection severed by silence between a mother and daughter, both shaped by the things they weren't allowed to believe in. Erin stepped forward. "Do you remember their names?" she asked. Her mother blinked surprised, then slowly smiled. "No, but I remember how they made me feel." Erin reached for the notebook and turned the page. Still blank, still waiting. She handed it to her mother. "Write that." Her mother looked at her eyes shining with something old and tender and uncertain, then took the pen and began. And in the vault somewhere far below and deep within a door, cracked open to a place no one had ever been. Because sometimes the most powerful stories don't come from the past. They begin in the moment someone is finally allowed to speak. The pen moved slowly in her mother's hand, each stroke tentative but deliberate, like someone retracing the memory of a melody they used to hum in secret. Erin watched in silence as the first words bled across the page. Not names, not facts, but emotions, safe seen, strange understood. Her mother wasn't writing a story in the traditional sense. She was writing a feeling, a connection, the kind that lingered in childhood like fog over a lake at dawn, indistinct but undeniable. The attic, usually so still, now seemed to lean in around them. The lamp's glow softened. The corners of the room didn't loom but opened. A warmth spread from the notebook into the air, a quiet recognition that a door long shut had finally been cracked. Her mother stopped writing after a single paragraph. She smiled, but it wasn't the easy performative kind of smile adults use when they pretend everything is fine. It was smaller, more real, tinged with something like grief, but lighter. She handed the notebook back, her hand brushing Erin's. "I didn't know how much I missed that part of myself," she said. I think I used to believe in something bigger. Not religion, not fantasy, just wonder." Erin nodded. She didn't need to say anything. She understood completely. When her mother left the room, closing the door softly behind her, Erin looked down at the notebook. The page was glowing faintly now, golden symbols creeping along the margins like vines. A new name had written itself at the top, Elowin. Below it, a second line formed, the one who was almost forgotten. This time, the notebook didn't pull her into another chamber or call her into a dream. Instead, the attic itself began to change. The wooden floor rippled softly under her bare feet, and the walls breathed. The familiar shapes of books and furniture blurred for a moment, as if the veil between here and elsewhere had grown thin. She didn't fight it. She simply stood holding the notebook against her chest and let herself drift forward into the transformation. The attic melted away, and she found herself standing on a shoreline. Not a beach, but a threshold, half sand, half memory. The sky above was a deep indigo, scattered with stars that pulsed like fireflies caught between waking and sleep. The sea beyond was still. No wind, no tide. Just a soft glow beneath the surface, like the ocean itself was lit from below by forgotten lanterns. She turned and saw a figure in the distance. Not a child, not a doll, a woman. Elowin. She stood with her feet just touching the waterhead, tilted to the side, as if listening to something only she could hear. Her hair was long and silver, but her posture was light, unburdened. When Erin approached, she didn't flinch. Instead, she spoke before Erin could say a word. "I waited so long for someone to remember me gently." Erin frowned. "Were you someone's imaginary friend?" Elowyn shook her head. "Not quite. I was almost one, a breath away, a wish that never fully formed, a presence dreamed of once then smothered by practicality and bedtime rules. The child who dreamed me wanted something soft and wild, but they were taught to fear what couldn't be explained. So I stayed here, in between," Erin murmured. "Yes, between belief and oblivion, between creation and silence." Erin stepped beside her, their reflections blending in the sea. "What happens now?" she asked. Elowyn smiled. "You gave me a name. That's all I ever needed, a place, a page, a breath." From behind them, a sound like wind began to stir, not air but voices, laughter, whispers, the voices of others like Elowyn, half-formed ideas, songs never finished, characters never given endings. They emerged from the horizon like silhouettes in fog, not approaching, not receding, simply being. "You opened the path," Elowyn said softly. "You made the vault a place for stories that were once denied even the chance to begin. Do you understand what that means?" Erin looked out at the water, at the sea of maybe friends and forgotten selves. "I think I do. It means it never ends." "Exactly," Elowyn replied. "The vault isn't a place, it's a promise, that no voice, no echo, no shadow goes unloved if someone is still willing to listen." The air around them shimmered. The sea brightened. Erin closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she was back in the attic. The notebook lay on her desk, closed now, its cover warm beneath her hand. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She knew it would be waiting. The dolls on her shelves, once quiet, once haunted, now simply were. Not dormant, not animated. Present. Peaceful. She curled up on her bed, the twilight pouring in through the round attic window, and listened not for footsteps or breathing, not for voices in the dark. She listened for stories, and one by one they began to arrive. That night, the attic glowed with a stillness so complete it felt like part of another world entirely. The window pane fogged slightly from the warmth inside, and outside the stars blinked in their quiet rhythm, indifferent and eternal. Erin lay awake, not out of fear, but anticipation. There was no dread here, only the calm pulse of something unfolding. Beneath her pillow, the notebook stirred slightly, as if aware she hadn't fully let go of it. But she wasn't ready to sleep. Not yet. She sat up slowly, the floor cold beneath her bare feet, as she moved to the desk. The notebook was already open when she reached it. No pages turned, no magical gust of wind, just the quiet invitation of the next blank sheet. But this one wasn't empty. At the center, a single question had appeared, handwritten in her own script, though she hadn't written it. Who speaks for the ones we've forgotten on purpose? It chilled her in a way that didn't involve ghosts or shadows. It reminded her of something deeper, memories we choose not to revisit, the people we pretend we never were, the thoughts we bury, because they disrupt the narrative of who we believe ourselves to be. Not monstrous, not evil, but inconvenient, incongruent, too raw to reconcile. The attic felt heavier now, but not in a threatening way. More like a library that had just been reorganized and was waiting for its first reader. The dolls on the shelves seemed to lean subtly toward her, not to frighten, but to share in her stillness. Even Fitch's name, long quiet, long integrated, seemed to glow faintly again. The next page turned itself. A name formed slowly, Grey Jonah. Then below it, the one who watched and waited. Erin blinked. That name felt familiar. Not from the vault, not from legend. From somewhere else, personal, recent, like something half heard in a dream but impossible to shake. a memory of being watched but not threatened. She remembered being 6 years old, sitting alone in the backyard after a fight with her cousin, whispering to the hedges because she was sure something was listening. She had given it a name, hadn't she? Gray Jonah. She had whispered it 3 times like a secret spell and promised it could stay if it kept her company. Then she forgot. Or at least, she told herself she had. Now he was back. A low creak echoed from the corner of the room. Not the unsettling kind, just enough to signal that something was present. She didn't flinch. Instead, she turned her chair toward the sound. Sitting in the farthest corner of the attic was a figure she hadn't seen in years. Tall, slender, wearing a coat that was 2 long sleeves frayed the fabric, shifting like smoke if you stared too long. His face was simple, unremarkable, the kind of face you forget while looking at it. But his eyes, one gray, one storm cloud blue, were steady. "You remembered," he said softly, voice like wind through pine needles. "I thought I imagined you. You did. That doesn't mean I wasn't real." She nodded slowly. "Why now? You found the others. You fixed what could be mended. You gave voice to the unspoken." His fingers curled slightly. "But not all things are meant to be healed. Some just want to be seen again. Even if only once." Aaron stood up and crossed the room. She didn't touch him. She didn't need to. "I'm sorry I left you behind." "You didn't leave me," he said. "You grew. It's not the same." She felt tears prick behind her eyes. She hadn't cried for any of the dolls, not really. But this was different. This was her own abandonment, her own self-denial. The pieces of childhood she had carefully edited out of her personal mythos. Jonah was a protector, a companion during the worst nights after her parents' fights, after the schoolyard teasing, after the fear of being too weird, too quiet, too much. He had watched and waited. "I don't need you anymore," she whispered. "I know," he said without sadness, "but I don't want to forget you again." "You won't." She reached for the notebook. Her hand shook slightly as she wrote on the page below his name, "You were my first safety." When she looked up, he was gone. No sound, no farewell. Just the soft scent of old pine needles and the warmth of something closed gently, like a door never meant to be slammed. The attic returned to its normal quiet. Not sterile, not supernatural. Just a room again. And yet, as Aaron closed the notebook and placed it on the desk, she felt lighter in a way she hadn't since childhood. As if she had finally pulled the last thorn from under her skin. She climbed back into bed, pulled the blanket over her shoulders, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep came fast, and when it did, it was filled not with warnings or riddles or fractured voices, but dreams of standing on warm grass with open skies, surrounded by silent dolls, smiling without mouths, and old friends who ask nothing except to be remembered as they once were, imperfect, imaginary, and loved. The days that followed blurred into one another, but not in a way that felt numbing or empty. Erin found herself drifting through her waking life with a kind of peaceful detachment, like someone slowly adjusting to a new frequency that only she could hear. At school, the halls were just as loud, the classes just as dull, but her thoughts no longer buzzed with static. She paid attention differently now. She watched people's eyes, the way someone glanced at the floor before speaking, how laughter sometimes came with a delay, like it had to pass through too many filters before it reached the surface. She began to notice the stories others didn't tell, not the lies, not the omissions, but the absences, the things they were still carrying, that hollow between words when someone talks about just being tired or fine. She recognized that space. She had lived in it for years. At home, the attic remained quiet. The notebook didn't pulse or glow. It simply waited, and Erin, too, waited. She didn't try to force the next page. Instead, she sat near it in the evening, sometimes with tea, sometimes sketching, sometimes just listening. Her mother started spending more time with her, often bringing old boxes up from the garage and sifting through them beside Erin without much conversation. They'd open boxes of old school crafts, drawings, notes, and broken toys, and a strange sort of grace would pass between them. Once her mother pulled out a handmade sock puppet with mismatched buttons and paused. "I made this when I was 7, she murmured, voice caught somewhere between nostalgia and something deeper. "I used to tell it all my secrets, but I think I called it a demon once, and my aunt threw it away. Or maybe I hid it. I can't remember." Erin smiled softly. "Maybe it found its way back to you." They didn't speak about the notebook directly. Her mother never asked, but Erin knew she knew. And that was enough. Late one evening, after the house had long since gone quiet, and the moon carved silver scars across the window pane, Erin awoke from a dreamless sleep to find the notebook open again. One word in the center of the page, "end." She stared at it for a long time. It didn't feel ominous. It felt inevitable. She turned the page. There was nothing else written. No name, no riddle, just the faint outline of her own handprint burned into the parchment, as if the notebook had mirrored her without asking. She placed her hand over it, and in doing so, something shifted, not in the attic, but in her mind. She was suddenly back at the vault, but it was different now. It was vast, boundless, no longer limited to stone corridors and dusty chambers. It was a constellation of stories stretching in all directions, glowing threads connecting them like stars in a sky only she could read. The dolls were there, yes, but also shadows of children who had once dreamed them. Whispers of lullabies never finished. Incomplete sketches pinned to invisible walls. Even thoughts never spoken aloud, because the fear of ridicule had choked them before they were born. She floated among them, not walking, not falling, just being. The vault was no longer a place she entered. It was part of her, and she could feel it, new stories waking, not haunting, calling her to listen, to witness, to remember. A voice rose in the distance, not male, not female, familiar but not identifiable. "You were never just a visitor." She turned. A mirror floated before her, reflecting not her face, but a dozen versions of herself at 5, at 10, at 15, some with shadows behind her eyes, some with open smiles, all holding something, a toy, a sketch, a book, a secret. The reflections merged slowly, until only her current self remained. "I thought I was just helping," she whispered. "You were becoming," the voice replied. Light pulsed through the threads of the vault. The notebook in her hand shimmered gold once more, but this time it was lighter, easier to hold, no longer heavy with the weight of what had been buried. "You've opened the way," the voice said. "Now others can find it." Erin didn't speak. She simply nodded, heartful eyes open. The light folded inward. The dream dissolved, and she awoke back in her attic before dawn, the notebook resting quietly on her lap. No glow, no just presence. The last page was no longer blank. A single line had appeared, scrawled in her own hand. Every forgotten thing was waiting to be remembered by someone brave enough to care. She closed the notebook, walked to the round window, and opened it wide. The air was cool and clean, filled with the scent of trees and the sound of nothing in particular. She didn't need magic to feel its presence anymore. She was it, and the world was finally quiet enough to hear her listen. Morning arrived gently, without fanfare. A hazy blue washed through the attic window, soft and diffused like the afterglow of a dream that hadn't quite let go. Erin stood barefoot on the wooden floorboards, the notebook now closed and nestled in the crook of her arm. She didn't open it, not because she feared what might appear, but because for the first time, it didn't demand anything of her. It wasn't a burden or a map. It was simply a companion, like the thread of a lullaby you hum out of habit when you feel safe enough to let your guard down. Downstairs, her mother was already making breakfast. The clatter of dishes, the the scent of toasting bread, the quiet rhythm of an ordinary life. It grounded Erin, even as the edges of her perception still shimmered with the residual echo of the vault. She moved through the morning slowly. Everything seemed a little sharper, like the world had shifted into higher contrast. The family photo on the hallway wall didn't just show faces anymore. It showed stories, moments paused in time, each one carrying its own silent shadow of memory and unspoken emotion. At school, the day unfolded like it always did, but Erin was different in it. She paid attention to things others missed. A boy who kept rubbing his thumb over the corner of his notebook as if trying to wear something down that no one else could see. A girl who laughed too loudly at things that weren't funny. A teacher who paused for a half-second longer between lessons, eyes flickering toward the window like she was waiting for something that never came. The vault hadn't left her. It had simply expanded, reaching into the spaces between people, illuminating the quiet griefs and forgotten selves they all carried but rarely spoke about. Later that afternoon, Erin found herself walking a different path home. Not by accident, but by a feeling. A tug, not physical, not even emotional, but a familiar shift in the air, the way the sky changes color just before it rains. She followed it past the usual corners, past the market and down a narrow alley where ivy curled up the sides of brick walls, and the ground smelled faintly of wet stone. At the end of the alley was a door. Not ornate, not ancient. Just a plain wooden door painted a soft, sea-washed green. She had never seen it before, but she wasn't surprised by it either. It was one of those doors meant only to be found by those who needed to find it. She reached out and touched the handle. It turned easily. Inside was a room the size of a small library. Not dusty, not glowing, just quiet. Shelves lined with boxes, each box labeled not with names, but with phrases like, "The almost story," "The friend I never told anyone about," "The thing I swallowed when they told me to be brave." Erin walked slowly past them, fingers brushing the edges. Everyone hummed faintly, like a closed book that still vibrates with the heartbeat of its writer. In the center of the room sat a woman, old, but not frail. Her hair was silver, coiled in a loose braid that fell over one shoulder. Her eyes were shut, but she looked directly at Erin when she spoke. "Ah," she said, "the seamkeeper has arrived." Erin didn't flinch. "I don't know if I'm still that." "You are, and more." The woman gestured to a chair across from her. Erin sat. This place, the woman continued, is one of many. A listening room. For the world's unsent letters, unfinished drawings, and unspoken apologies. It exists because you made room for it. Erin looked around again. What am I supposed to do? The woman opened a small drawer in the table between them and pulled out a simple square of cloth. Worn. Faded. A child's handkerchief frayed at the corners. She placed it in Erin's hands. "Find the one who left this behind. Stitch their name back into the world." Erin turned the cloth over. There was no name. Only a single initial embroidered in uneven thread, L. She looked up. The woman was gone. No flash, no sound, just absence. The library faded. She was standing in the alley again, the handkerchief still in her palm. A gust of wind passed through, lifting a few dry leaves along the cobblestones. In the distance, church bells rang. Her world remained intact, unchanged to anyone else. But in her hands, the beginning of another forgotten story pulsed quietly, like a heartbeat waiting to be noticed again. She tucked the handkerchief into her coat and walked home with her eyes wide open. She would find Elle, and she would remember. The days grew longer. After that, slow, intentional. Erin moved through them, like someone straddling two timelines. Her presence grounded in the ordinary, but her perception always slightly askew, tuned to something deeper, humming just beneath reality. She continued her daily rituals. School chores, moments with her mother that felt more whole now, but each action was layered, shadowed with meaning that only she seemed to understand. The notebook remained still, its pages no longer whispering, but simply waiting, resting content in its silence. Yet the handkerchief, frayed, delicate, embroidered with that lone, uneven L, called to her like an unresolved chord. She would take it out at night, trace the stitches and listen for something, an image, a feeling, a thread, and slowly, a place began to form. She saw flashes first, a tiny bed beneath an angled ceiling, a pair of muddy rain boots tucked beside a wicker chest, a dim hallway lit by a single wall sconce, a soft, wheezing laugh echoing faintly as if caught in the folds of an old coat. Then a name not shouted or spoken, but remembered Lana. Not a friend, not a sister, a presence. Erin couldn't say for certain if Lana had ever been a person, or simply a companion her childhood mind had stitched together from all the small moments when she'd felt unseen and needed someone to sit with her in the dark. But the memories of her were sharp. A cup held out when Erin cried, a story whispered during storms, a cold hand that felt comforting rather than chilling. She followed that feeling. It took her down paths she hadn't walked in years to the old park that had since been overtaken by weeds the edge of the creek, where the stones still carried the scent of summer rain, and finally to an abandoned cottage that sat deep within the wood where she and her cousins once dared each other to go, but never did. The air thickened as she approached, not with dread, but with the kind of reverence one feels when standing in a place where something meaningful has been forgotten. The door creaked open with little resistance. Inside the house had surrendered to time-faded curtains, hung limp over broken windows. The wallpaper peeled in jagged patches, and dust floated in lazy spirals through the still air. Erin stepped inside. The room was silent, but it wasn't empty. On a table by the far wall sat a box, small, wooden, covered in faded stickers the kind children use to mark their treasures. She opened it slowly. Inside was a bundle of folded papers yellowed with age. On the top was a crayon drawing of two girls standing under a crooked sun, one with her name scribbled beneath Erin, the other Lana. Erin didn't remember making it, but she didn't doubt that she had. The next page was a letter written in a looping, unsure hand. If you find this, it means I had to go. I didn't want to, but I think maybe you started forgetting me. It's okay. You had to grow up. Just promise me one thing. Don't forget how to listen to the quiet. That's where I live now. That's where I wait. L. Erin sat down on the dusty floor and cried softly, not from grief, but from recognition. She wasn't sad for Lana. She was grateful. This imaginary girl, this stitched-together piece of Erin's forgotten tenderness had waited, had believed, had stayed. And now, she could come home. Erin took the handkerchief and wrapped it around the letter. The attic welcomed her return with warmth. That night, beneath a sky velvet with stars, she wrote Lana's name into the notebook. As the ink dried, it bloomed, not with fire or light, but with vines curling tendrils of green and soft pink flowers that grew across the page, as if the name had always belonged to something alive. She closed the book, set it on the shelf between two others, and finally lay down to sleep, not to escape, not to hide, but to rest. The vault no longer called to her. It didn't need to. She had done what she came to do. She had remembered. She had listened. She had made room. And in the stillness that followed as the house exhaled and the night deepened, 1,000 untold stories stirred across the world, just a little closer to being heard. Now that our journey has come to a close, take a deep breath and allow your body to fully relax into wherever you are, bed couch or quiet corner of the world. Let your eyelids grow heavier as you hold onto the soft echo of Erin's story. The the warmth of remembered names, and the power of imagination that lingers even after we've outgrown it. There's something quietly comforting in the idea that not everything we let go of is truly lost, that the forgotten can be remembered, that even the imaginary, the ones who kept us company in silence, who made us feel brave when the world felt too loud, can find their way back when we're finally ready to listen again. So, if you find yourself drifting off, now know that you're not alone. Not really. Maybe there's a voice at the edge of your memory, a hand you haven't held in years, a thread that still waits to be stitched. And maybe that's exactly where peace begins. Thank you for staying with me tonight.